Chapter 1276. When they heard the first explosion, Jodl's team followed Brian's order and rushed out of their hiding places one by one. But before they could take a few steps, another earth-shattering noise came from the north. The noise was so loud that it even stirred up the dust on the ruins. The ground shook so violently that they almost fell to the ground. Jodl steadied himself and looked in the direction of the Tusk City in surprise. Because he was at a low position, he could only see an orange fireball rising with billowing smoke, like a fist waving towards the sky. Around the fireball, the red mist was brightly illuminated, as if the sky was burning. The Sand Nation's eyes were filled with fear. This scene could only be described as the wrath of the three gods. "Don't be afraid." Jodl clenched his teeth, raised his arms and shouted, "That's the chief's way to deal with the enemy. It's the demons who should be afraid." His words made everyone come back to their senses. "Yes, it's the chief's heavenly fire. Don't stop. Keep going." The stagnant team started running again. People kept coming out from the cracks in the walls, the windows, the corners of the collapsed houses, and joined the attacking team. Soon, this inconspicuous group of people became an unstoppable tide, rushing toward the Tusk City. Jodl was the first to run. Although he had been convinced by the chief for a long time, he always thought that the Sand Nation was better at fighting than the Northerners, especially a warrior from a small clan like him who was born in a barren oasis and had been fighting with death since he was a child. It wasn't just bows and arrows, even if it was a gun, it would be the same. After receiving Brian's training, he had even developed a unique skill. Not only was he good at target shooting, but he could also hit the target while running. Now was undoubtedly the time to prove himself. Not only did he want to be the first to rush into the city, but he also wanted to be the first to win the battle. He wanted Jodl's name to be known by the whole army. However, when the troops climbed up the slope and saw the city wall of the Tusk City, a terrible heat wave swept over them. For a moment, Jodl almost thought that he was back in the southernmost region, and that he was still on the top of a sand dune in the middle of summer. The hot air scorched his skin, making it hard for him to even open his eyes. The people behind them weren't any better. It was as if the whole team had crashed into an invisible wall. Their speed slowed down, and some of the Northerners who had rushed to the front even ran back pathetically. They crouched down at the bottom of the slope, as if they could avoid the sudden heat by doing so. Jodl forced himself to walk a few dozen steps, feeling that something was wrong. The fireball that rose into the air had already been extinguished, leaving only a ring of smoke that was still spreading. A piece of the red mist that had originally covered the sky was missing, as if it had been bitten off by a giant beast. The surrounding mist did not immediately fill in, instead forming a large arc of emptiness. Through the open city gate, he saw that the ground inside the city seemed to be churning with heat waves. The contours of the buildings had become extremely distorted, especially the wooden houses that had been destroyed by the explosion. The scattered, scorched black pillars were like the claws of a demon that had reached out from the ground. The enemies did not rush over to stop them, nor did they flee in panic. In fact, he could not find any trace of the demons. At the same time, Jodl felt that he could not breathe. The surging heat around him made him dare not open his mouth to breathe. His body also seemed to resist moving forward. Every step was as heavy as a mountain. Damn it! When did I become so weak? The city wall was not far away, but he felt that he had lost all his strength and his vision was blurring. Jodl staggered and fell to the ground. The last thing he saw was Fairy's disgusted face as he dragged him away. The outcome of this battle was completely beyond the expectations of Iron Axe and the general staff. According to the original plan, most of the outer city would be turned into a sea of fire by the rows of burning barrels that surrounded the northern part of the royal city. The raging flames would not only engulf the flammable houses, but also incinerate the red mist inside and outside the city. This would make the Tusk City an isolated island for the time being, and the demons who did not carry breathing devices would inevitably fall into chaos and panic. The final decision was made by the ambush troops. Although Roland did not know the exact number of the demons, according to his previous intelligence, the demons would deploy their troops according to the number of people they occupied. The fact that the Tusk city had been evacuated would definitely be noticed by the scouts of the enemies. Therefore, during the first few days when the red mist covered the city, there would not be more than 500 enemies entering the city. In other words, the first army would have an absolute advantage in both numbers and momentum. As for how many enemies they could kill in the end, that was not the focus of this battle. After all, in order to avoid the detection of the devil beasts, the soldiers had to hide in secret passages and ruins, and all the heavy weapons were useless. It was not difficult to suppress the enemies with rifles and anti-demon grenades, but it was difficult to chase after the enemies. The main purpose of this battle was to reduce the demons' momentum. As long as the demons realized that the retreating human beings still had the ability to fight back, they would be able to relieve the pressure on the evacuating troops. However, the battle came to an abrupt end at the stage of the explosion. The expected wall of fire did not appear. Instead, it turned into an earth-shattering explosion. King's City, where the flames swept across, became a forbidden area. The ambush troops did not even have the chance to cross the city gate before they were forced back by the heatwave. Some of them even suffered burns and fainted. At this point, it was obvious that the follow-up attack could not be carried out. Of course, this did not mean that the battle was a failure. Iron Axe could even feel the scorching air outside the city wall, so he could easily imagine the situation inside the city. It had never been proven that the demons could withstand the heat better than humans. The only thing that Iron Axe regretted was that he could not go to the battlefield himself to see the specific results of this battle. He did not know when the temperature inside the city would drop, and this was obviously not a good place to stay. "Sir, all the troops have retreated from the Tusk Castle. We're the only ones left." Brian walked into the temporary command center, his eyes full of excitement. For him, who had witnessed this scene in a real battle without experiencing the test of the new weapon, this battle was indeed a scene that he would remember for the rest of his life. "Good. Let's retreat." Iron Axe nodded. "I guess it won't be long before the enemies notice us. When the pursuing troops arrive, it won't be easy for us to leave." Chapter 1277. 20 hours ago, Hacksword received a report that there was a huge fireball in the direction of the kingdom of Wolfheart. At that time, Hacksword was still in a city in the west of the kingdom of Everwinter, accepting the allegiance of a human lord. To be honest, Hacksword did not want to pay attention to such a small thing. If it were not for the fact that the reporter repeatedly mentioned the strange explosion and the unusual destructive power, Hacksword would not have come in person. Hacksword was annoyed enough to deal with human beings, but he was the only one in the entire Western Front who could do this. Not every subordinate was as smart as Ursruk, who would always learn something useful. Most descendants regarded human beings as bugs, let alone learning their language. Hacksword's generals were no exception. They were all loyal and capable, but they were only limited to fighting. If Hacksword asked them to negotiate with human beings, they would tear the human beings into pieces in less than half a day. However, human beings were very easy to tame. Although they were physically weak, they were very smart. In the early stage of development, they could replace many inferior demons. Therefore, it was not in the interest of Hacksword to kill them all. In the end, it was all Valkyrie's fault. Valkyrie was the senior lord who was good at this, but now she was still immersed in the red mist pool. Hacksword always felt that his patience was running out. However, when Hacksword flew over the Tusk City, he immediately realized that something was wrong. There were very few floating monsters in the city, as if something had cleaned up the city. The inside of the city was a mess. Houses that had been washed away and charred wooden frames could be seen everywhere. When the team landed, Hacksword found that the ground was warm and a pungent smell came to his face. Hacksword soon found the source of the smell. A group of strange-looking inferior demons curled up on the street. Their skin had turned black and fallen off. Obviously, they had been burned to death by the fire. What was strange was that there was no obvious fire starter around the inferior demons. There were only bricks and mud around them. It was hard to imagine how the fire could reach them. There was more than one such scene. "Todalok, you and your subordinates will each take 10 people to search for the human army. If you find anything, report to me immediately." Yes, Master. Siases, find out what's going on. Also, find out if there are any survivors. Yes, my lord. The ascended person quickly accepted the order and left. Hacksword, on the other hand, walked along the long street and slowly made his way to the northern part of the city, where the damage was the most severe. According to the report, it was a supply team of inferior demons that were attacked. These pitiful creatures that could never advance were at the bottom of the race, equivalent to human laborers or slaves. At that time, they were transporting a batch of obsidian and secondary red mist pawns into the Tusk City so that they could build a camp for junior demons or level UPS. This could also be seen from the wreckage at the scene. The cut and dyed obsidian was scattered everywhere, and some of the inferior demons were still in the same state when they were moved. There was no sign of fighting, which meant that the humans did not have direct contact with the supply team. The battle broke out abruptly and ended abruptly. Therefore, it was reasonable to infer that the other party had set up a trap here instead of gathering an army under the nose of the Bogle beasts. Totolok's search this time was likely to be fruitless. But the more it was so, the more apprehensive Sky Lord felt. He would rather the enemies come in groups, which would make it easier for them to be discovered. Hacksword did not care about the lives of the inferior demons, but he could not afford to lose the battle on the Western Front. If the main force ran into such a trap, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no doubt that the enemies had used fire to attack. Hacksword was no stranger to fire. In the past battles of Divine Will, they had also used fire to conquer human cities. However, because the red mist did not like high temperatures, it was rare to see it. However, it was the first time for Sky Lord to see a fire that could burn an inferior demon to death. Unless the whole city was turned into a huge furnace. But how was that possible? If the humans had such a means, Sky Lord had to know that the Western Front was in danger. Fire? An image suddenly flashed across Hacksword's mind. It was the image he saw when he searched Kabardabi's memory in the realm of mind. A bright fireball suddenly burst out like the rising sun. Was it this kind of fire weapon that Kabardabi saw? Sky Lord could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Just as Sky Lord was feeling bewildered, Siases's voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. My lord, the basic situation has been investigated. This supply team has a total of 350 inferior demons. At the same time, there are more than 10 primal demons as guards. We haven't found any survivors yet, but I think I've figured out what those bugs are capable of. Oh, tell me about it. Please follow me. Hacksword followed Siases to the north of the city wall. Some primal life forms were busy digging something. Around them was a pile of black metal fragments. Further away, a few siege vehicles were lying on the side of the road. Ever since the symbiotic demons were successfully cultivated, these old war machines became specialized transportation tools. Siases stretched out his tentacles and picked up a fragment on the ground. There were obvious traces of melting. If you put them together, they should be a container. There are hundreds of them lined up along the edge of the city. I think the bugs probably stuffed them with snow powder and combustibles. They plan to cut off the supply team's escape route and then launch an attack during the chaos. After fighting with humans for so long, Hacksword was no stranger to the weapons they used. In the process of hunting down the enemies, he had obtained a lot of them. Whether it was the fire branch or the fire crossbow, they both used explosive materials such as snow powder as a primer. Compared to magic-powered weapons, it was obviously much more complicated. Because of this, the structure of these weapons was very exquisite. This was a skill that had not been seen 400 years ago. If it was just an ordinary flame, how could it cause such great damage? My lord, I'm afraid these flames are not ordinary. At least their temperature is much higher than ordinary flowing fire. But even so, they can't kill all the inferior demons. I think the key lies in those siege vehicles. What do you mean? Hacksword asked. Siases was a psionic warlock. Ascendants who evolved from this branch had sharp observation skills. This was why the Sky Lord had sent him to investigate the battlefield. When the snow powder exploded, it probably affected the siege vehicles that were passing through the city gate. The latter are usually used to transport heavy objects, such as red mist ponds or storage tanks. The high temperature caused them to explode and further aggravated the disintegration of the red mist. Siasis's rapidly swaying tentacles made hissing sounds. You know, when the temperature reaches a certain level, anything can be ignited, including us. Siasis's explanation made Haxord feel slightly relieved. Regardless of whether this explosion was a coincidence, at least the huge fragments of the metal bucket made him feel more at ease. Needing to bury a large number of traps beforehand and being able to launch them at any time were two completely different concepts. As long as they took strict precautions, these traps would not pose a threat to the large army in the wild. Of course, it also knew that it was not easy to quickly inspect a human city. Forbidding the red mist ponds and storage tanks from being transported and stacked together could not completely eliminate this threat. It did not think that the simple-minded primal demons and inferior demons could solve this problem. The most effective way was to use the humans themselves. My lord, what should we do next? Slow down the speed of entering the city and let the humans inspect for us. Haxord quickly made a decision. We can't transfer more inferior demons from other places for the time being. Let Snow Reflection Castle make up for the losses. I think Earl Marwain will be happy to work for me. Chapter 1278. Ever since the red mist poured down from the peak of the impassable mountain, everything in the world seemed to be covered by a thin veil. Marwain Parker thought that he would feel as uncomfortable as being in a dusty mine, but to his surprise, he did not feel any discomfort. If he breathed hard, he could even feel a trace of dampness and coolness. According to the demon commander, the mist contained the essence of life. Not only would it not cause any harm to humans, but it would also nourish them. Only witches who specialized in going against it would suffer a fatal backlash. Let's not talk about the credibility of this statement for now, but from the looks of it, other than slightly affecting the line of sight, there were no other disadvantages. After a month, he had basically gotten used to life in the red mist. Your Grace, His Excellency the Sky Lord has sent someone. Just then, a guard walked into the study. He's waiting for you in the courtyard. Marwain nodded without batting an eyelid. Ask him to stay where he is. I'll go over right away. After the guard closed the door, Marwain could not help but smile. That's right, dude. No matter how many times he heard it, he was elated. A month ago, when the demons passed through the ice abyss and attacked Snow Reflection Castle, he thought it was the rumored end of the world. He did not expect the demons to let him go. After discarding his inherent prejudice, Marwain realized that the demon who called himself the Sky Lord was not as difficult to communicate with as he had imagined. To a certain extent, he was even easier to deal with than the people of Grey Castle. At least the former would not turn a noble's territory into nothingness without a word. The demons did not collect taxes, seize land, or seize power. As long as they swore loyalty, they would be able to keep everything they had and even have the chance to obtain more. Apart from the fact that their methods were a little rough, there were no other disadvantages. Especially after the Sky Lord handed him the management of the 3 cities around Snow Reflection Castle, he felt that this might not be a bad idea. Snow Reflection Castle was like an isolated island, easy to defend and difficult to attack. It was difficult for others to threaten his territory, and it was difficult for him to expand it. He had thought that he would have to wear the title of Earl for the rest of his life, but he did not expect that he would take a big step forward when the end of the world came. With the entire northern region of the Kingdom of Everwinter, he was fully deserving of the title of Duke of the Northern Region. Marwain pressed his hand to the corner of his mouth, and with great difficulty, he suppressed his smile. He closed the window and turned to go downstairs. Yes, when the demons invaded the city, they did kill dozens of guards and hundreds of citizens, but how could there be no deaths in war? Wasn't the demarcation line between the nobles also decided through war? Now that he controlled 4 cities, not only did the imperial guards not shrink, but they doubled in number. Needless to say, as long as there was land and food for them to live, they would be able to make up for it in a few years. As for those who said behind his back that he chose to submit to the devil out of fear, they should all be sent to the gallows. Upon entering the courtyard, Marwain immediately saw the messenger sent by the Sky Lord, as well as the gigantic monster lying beside him. To be honest, he could not tell the difference between these guys from their appearance. Unlike Hacksword, they were ugly and crude, and did not know any manners or manners. If it wasn't for the sake of the commander of the Devil Army, he didn't want to deal with these beasts at all. "What instructions does your Excellency Sky Lord have for me?" The other party took out a stone from his mount's bag and handed it to him. Then he opened his bloody mouth and said in a clumsy tone, "Listen." Magic voice transmission again. Feeling the fishy smell from the messenger's mouth, Marwain could not help but lean back slightly, trying hard to suppress the disgust in his heart. "I'm listening." The stone flickered twice, and soon, a familiar voice sounded out of nowhere. "How does it feel to be the lord of a territory? I hope you haven't forgotten your promise, Mr. Lord." "Of course not, Your Excellency," Marwain hurriedly replied. "I've always been ready to serve you." "Very good. I believe that your people have gotten used to our existence in a month. Now it's time. I need you to gather a team to assist us in building a camp, not in Everwinter, but in the kingdom of Wolfheart. We need at least 2,000 people. Of course, the more the better. Do I need to do manual labor?" Marwain estimated that it would not be difficult to gather so many people from 4 cities. "Leave it to me, Your Excellency. I didn't choose the wrong person." The Sky Lord's voice was filled with satisfaction. "Also, how's the research on the weapons I gave you? Can your people replicate them?" Marwain looked troubled. "It's not a problem to use them, but I'm afraid it'll take some time to replicate them. I've gathered the best blacksmiths in the northern region and let them each forge a part, but the progress isn't ideal. I'm afraid it has something to do with the witches. After all, the blacksmiths told me that the parts don't seem to be made by ordinary people." "I think so too." Fortunately, the Sky Lord did not seem to blame him. "But even so, you should be able to use it to counter the people of Grey Castle. This is my second order to you. Send people to stop Grey Castle from plundering the people of Wolfheart. I'll give you the other weapons we seized. But I don't have enough knight, then go and recruit them." The Sky Lord interrupted. "Don't you humans like to use this method to expand your subordinates?" He divided his territory and roped in those who had the ability to do things for him. "Don't hesitate to name a price. If you do this well, it won't be difficult for you to become the King of Everwinter." Marwain's body trembled. The King of Everwinter, a title that he had only dared to dream of, had now appeared in front of him in such a way? He suppressed his racing heartbeat and tried his best to control his voice. "Yes, Your Excellency. I'll do my best to complete this task. Hurry up. I want to see the results as soon as possible. I won't let you down." The light from the stone disappeared. Come back in a week." The messenger climbed onto the flesh-winged monster, raised his hands, and soared into the sky. The latter let out a strange cry, flapped its wings, and flew out of the city, quickly disappearing from sight. On the other hand, Marwain's face was covered in flying dust. "Damn it." He coughed as he thought to himself, if these demons behaved and spoke like the Sky Lord, they probably wouldn't be known as monsters from hell. After returning to the castle, he immediately called for the old scholar. Although the old scholar's previous performance was rather terrible, and he even wet his pants on top of the city wall, Marwain didn't have a more reliable strategist for the time being. After repeating the Sky Lord's request, Marwain asked, "What do you think?" "Your Excellency, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." The old scholar held his hand excitedly. "Since your father's generation, I've been serving the Parker family. Expanding our power beyond the Snow Reflection Castle has always been his wish. Now that you've not only accomplished the first step, but also have a chance to become the King of Everwinter, we must seize this opportunity no matter what." "I think so too, but do you think we can really defeat the people of Grey Castle with these knight?" Marwain voiced out his doubts. "You've seen how exquisite those snow powder crossbow bolts are. It's basically impossible to replicate them. And the demons must have a limited number of them. What should we do after we've exhausted them?" "No, Your Excellency, we don't need to fight the army of Grey Castle head-on. The old scholar shook his head. His Excellency the Sky Lord doesn't plan to do so either. His exact words were, "Stop the plundering." As far as I know, the troops of Grey Castle are very scattered. As long as we have equal weapons, we can use strategy to take the initiative. If we can successfully destroy a few raiding squads, they will definitely be restrained. In fact, when I was listening to you, I thought of a brilliant plan. Oh? Tell me about it. The old scholar whispered his idea into the Duke's ear. Marwain's face immediately lit up. Chapter 1279. In the city of Neverwinter, Grey Castle. 2 days later, Vendi walked into Roland's office with the test records of the 2 new witches. "I have to say, Your Majesty, their abilities are very complicated," Agatha said as she handed Roland the report. "This is the first time I've seen so many variables in one ability. This is only a part of it. I'm afraid you'll have to wait a few more days to figure it out." Roland put down his work with great interest and quickly skimmed through the report. "In that case, the tequila witches should be very interested, right?" Vendi nodded and said, "They asked Phyllis to test the chosen one as soon as possible. Unfortunately, the light beams of the 2 witches weren't obvious, and they were far from the key of the instrument of divine retribution." Upon hearing this news, Roland was actually relieved. He had just come up with a plan to electrify the whole city, and all the magic cores were being transformed into the Mystery Moon instrument. If the chosen one suddenly appeared, Celine would definitely be full of resentment. After all, it would take decades to adjust the ordinary magic cores to the mode of divine retribution, and it would certainly not be a pleasant experience to squat in front of the magic cores every day. According to Honey, these senior tequila witches seemed to be addicted to sunbathing. Instead of lying on their backs under the noon sun, they would climb out of their caves at night and lie there until sunrise. Since the strong light would hurt the carrier, they should not like to go out. Although Roland did not understand why they were doing this, he could tell that they had been quite relaxed recently. This was undoubtedly a good sign. Roland quickly turned to the last page of the report. Thylane's ability mainly affected emotions, which could only take effect after she had taken it. Like most enchantment witches, her ability had a time limit, which depended on the size of the object and the amount of magic power she had invested. The test results showed that the magic potion could affect more than just joy and pain. It could also affect sleepiness, exhaustion, anxiety, fear. As long as it could be experienced by humans, it could more or less affect them. When the effect of the potion was over, these accumulated emotions would burst out all at once. Roland could roughly understand why the effect of the magic potion was extremely complicated, but the light beam was ordinary. In a sense, it was equivalent to a kind of nerve blocker, temporarily delaying the time for the nerve conduction and hormone effect to take effect a little bit later. Some drugs in the future could also do this, but the side effects were great, and it was easy to get addicted. Of course, the simplicity of the light beam was not enough to measure the value of an ability. If Thylane's magic potion was sold in another world, its effect and potential profits would definitely make all the pharmaceutical giants jealous. The mechanisms of various mental diseases were far more complicated and difficult to cure than visible internal and external injuries. Although it could not eliminate the symptoms, it could accurately delay them. As long as it was properly controlled, the impact of the disease could be minimized. For example, anxiety, fatigue, and other negative states mainly hindered people's daily lives. If they could delay the onset of their symptoms until they fell asleep, they would be able to stabilize the digestion without realizing it. Once people no longer suffer from distractions and insomnia, the body's recovery speed is much faster. Even if it was a life-threatening injury, the effect of the magic potion could not be underestimated. People would often lose their willpower in the face of severe pain, which would make it difficult for them to take effective emergency measures. As a result, they would miss the golden opportunity to rescue them. If they could give themselves first aid or hold on until the paramedics arrived, their chances of survival would be much higher. After that, the paramedics would only need to prepare for the severe pain and shock, and they would be able to safely get through the most difficult part of the initial period. In addition, There was more than one witch who could treat pain. Roland remembered his sister mentioning that there was a witch named Della on Sleeping Island who could eliminate pain. There was also the hero of the Witch Union who could transfer non-traumatic diseases to other living creatures. Although it was not clear whether she could transfer mental diseases, it was worth a try. The key was that without Thylane's magic potion, they could not be used effectively. On the battlefield, the soldiers could be seriously injured at any time, but the witches could not do anything else. In fact, many soldiers of the First Army had died on the way to the hospital because they had lost consciousness after being injured and were unable to receive immediate treatment. Now, this situation could be greatly improved. According to Vendi's test results, Thylane could only control the direction of the magic potion, such as negative or positive, but she could not control a specific emotion. This was what most new witches lacked the most: learning to understand and accurately control their own abilities. However, with Vendi and Agatha's guidance, Roland did not have to worry about this. When Thylane could make the magic potion work on a specific emotion, the last weakness of the magic potion would be eliminated. Through the report, he could already see the rise of a giant in the pharmaceutical industry. The market for this industry would undoubtedly be bigger than Chaos Drinks. As for the other which, Roland stroked the table at the end of the notebook and sighed with emotion. "Your Majesty, this is..." Nightingale also noticed the various colors on the table. She looked up at Vendi and asked, "Are you sure about the content?" "I can only say so. After all, we don't have enough samples to compare in such a short period of time," Vendi replied. "The only thing we can be sure of is that the numbers don't just decrease. To put it simply, the strange numbers that Momo saw could be regarded as the natural time limit of a person's current stage, and the colors represented different trends of decline." In the report, Vendi recorded the results of her and Momo's observation of the entire city of Neverwinter. The color of the residents in the residential area was lighter than that of the refugees in the temporary residential area. She concluded that hunger, disease, defects, and other unhealthy factors could cause the color change, and the darker the color, the smaller the number. She also mentioned an example. After a migrant from the kingdom of Wolfheart drank the purification water, the number above his head increased from a dark brown 5 to a 7. If this ability was accurate, it could be assumed that this migrant was suffering from some sort of infectious disease. Based on his current state, he only had 5 years left to live. However, after the treatment with the purification water, the stage was changed, and the ability re-evaluated the time limit. Although Vendi did not know the specific meaning of the different colors, she could generally regard them as unhealthy. "Your Majesty..." Nightingale's face revealed a worried expression. "It's better than expected, isn't it?" Roland comforted her. "At least it can increase back to normal as long as we use the right method." Vendi opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but she held back in the end. Chapter 1280. Roland took a piece of draft paper from the table and roughly calculated the average age of the residents in the residential area and the temporary residential area. He concluded that the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was between 40 and 50, while the average age of the residents in Neverwinter was only about 35. Roland could see many problems from this point alone. Generally speaking, the increase and decline of the average lifespan was a long-term process. At the beginning, the living standard of the residents in Bordertown was obviously not much better than that of the refugees. In just 5 years, the local residents' lifespan had increased by a level, and Nana and Lily were undoubtedly the biggest contributors. She can get thousands of data in 2 days. Does Momo need to look at them one by one when she uses her ability? Roland asked. Yes. If she has enough magic power, she can see the numbers of all the people in her field of vision at the same time. Wendy replied softly, but it seems that she has never done this before, and she has never tested her limits. She feels that her ability is a curse. Even if she knows it, she can't do anything about it. It's like watching the people around her die little by little. Nightingale sighed. Curse? Nothing but bringing misfortune? Roland thought disapprovingly, that's a big mistake. When a country developed to a certain extent, any government order could have a very far-reaching impact. The traditional village management obviously could not keep up with the changing pace of the situation, so the significance of statistics came from this. Summarizing, observing, and tracking the changes in these statistics, and making targeted adjustments to the details of the government order could be said to be an indispensable ability for any organization that wanted to enter the threshold of modern times, and the change in the average lifespan was a very important part of it. If they used conventional methods to record the data, not only would they need enough basic departments and manpower, but it would also take decades of perseverance to see initial results. After all, no one knew how long people could live before they died. At present, except for Neverwinter, the other cities in Grey Castle had only just established a secondary city hall that could carry out government orders. It was common for them to have 1 or 2 staff members, let alone to carry out the detailed population statistics of the residential areas and streets. In fact, Scroll had a lot to do with the fact that the information system for the residents of Neverwinter was so complete. When the administrative office had enough manpower to send literate people to work in grassroots organizations such as the Neighborhood Committee, then Neverwinter would truly meet the requirements of an all-powerful government. On the other hand, Momo could help Grey Castle skip the time accumulation stage and build a preliminary statistical system in a situation where everything was lacking. This was the so-called cooking without rice, and this was under the situation where Grey Castle only had a superficial understanding of her abilities. By the time Wendy found out the specific meanings of the colors, such as the effects of diseases, hunger, and environmental factors, she would be able to easily obtain a large and detailed database. Not to mention, this data also had the effect of prediction. As long as it was used properly, this ability could bring benefits to almost every aspect of the kingdom's operations. The nobles in the kingdom of Wolfheart had no idea what they had missed. In Roland's eyes, Momo was already an honorable member of the administrative office. In the future, she would at least be a minister. By the way, has Nana's treatment schedule been arranged? Roland asked as he closed the notebook. Vendy nodded. It's today. Do you want to go with me? The medical center was one of the busiest areas in the city, especially after the end of the war. Nana Pine was no exception. Although she did not need to stay in the laboratory for a long time like Anna, she was already booked for treatment every day. It was said that there were hundreds of people in the queue and it was still increasing. This was also related to the characteristics of her ability. When she treated a severed limb, all her magic power would be consumed in about a quarter of an hour. As a result, people who lost more than a palm would not be able to apply for treatment. Instead, they would be issued a disability certificate as a substitute. When Nana became an adult or her ability evolved, her magic power would greatly increase. Only then could these injured people jump the queue for treatment. Speaking of which, Nana's day of adulthood should be this year's Months of Demons. Roland thought. For some reason, whenever he mentioned the little girl who used to be in the same class as Anna, the first image that came to his mind was her holding a chicken in her hands and angrily accusing him. All right, I'll go with you. Momo did not expect that she would not be driven away after showing her ability. Instead, she would be warmly accepted by Vendy. Now, she and Thylane both lived in the witch building and became members of the witch union. Every time after dinner, other witches would come to visit Momo. Some of them brought delicious food that Momo did not know the name of, and some of them would kindly instruct Momo on how to use the equipment in the room and what they needed to pay attention to in the castle district. In just 2 days, Momo's view of the world had changed dramatically. She had never thought that being alive was such a wonderful thing. When Momo learned that she still had a chance to see her eyes again, she threw herself into Vendy's arms and burst into tears. This was the only place where her tears could flow freely. Don't worry. Vendy patted her on the back and comforted her. Although Nana rarely lives in the witch building, she's also a member of the witch union. She's about the same age as you. I'm sure she'll be happy to cure you. On the appointed day, Momo was taken to the hospital by Belle. On the way to the hospital, Momo had already learned about the basic situation of the healing witches from Belle. Unlike Momo, Miss Pine was not only born into a noble family, but also had great abilities. She was known as the Little Angel of Neverwinter and had been living in the clouds since the beginning. Momo could almost imagine Miss Pine's appearance. She was a lovely girl who always wore beautiful clothes with a smile on her face and behaved gracefully. Anyone who saw her would have a good impression of her. Therefore, when Belle called her into the treatment room, Momo was a little nervous and even felt a sense of inferiority. She lowered her head slightly. Is this the person who's going to be treated next? A clear voice came into her ears. Yes, her name is Momo. She's also a witch, just like you. Momo felt strangely familiar with the voice. She could not help but look at the speaker in surprise. It was His Majesty. It was at this moment that she saw the legendary Miss Angel. The next moment, Momo used all her strength to stop herself from screaming. Nana Pine was wearing a white coat that covered her whole body, only her eyes were exposed. Not to mention beautiful and gorgeous, even ordinary people's clothes would not be simple to this degree. Chapter 1281. Ah, don't worry, it's not my blood. Nana took off her robe with the help of Belle. It's just that the injured person's arm was crushed by the rolling mill, so it's inevitable that the scene will be a bit chaotic. Is that so? Yes? Come, let me see your injury. What a strong aura. Are they really the same age? Momo swallowed, carefully took off her blindfold, and slowly walked toward Nana. Well, it's similar to what Sister Vendi said. The magic power should be enough. After the examination, the little girl handed her a bowl of medicine and then patted the bed next to her. Drink it and lie down. It'll take about 10 minutes. Momo did as she was told, but she was stunned to see the little girl take out a knife. Your Majesty. Vendi. She looked at the two people beside her as if asking for help, and her voice became sobbing. Come on, Nana, Vendi said helplessly. Can't you take it slow and give the new sister some time to adapt? Hey, this is a normal procedure, Nana said in surprise. If we don't cut open the old wound and completely destroy the healed part, the treatment won't work. That's right, but you can chat with her first, then talk about the previous case? I think it's more convenient to use a saw than an axe when cutting off a limb. No, I'm not talking about that. Indeed, His Majesty chimed in. A saw can ensure that the cut is basically neat, but if it's a big bone like a leg, it'll be very difficult to cut it, right? The skull is not much better. Those nurses are not much stronger than me. If Sister Anna can help, it'll be much easier. It's my fault. But it's not difficult to solve. How about I design an electric one for you later? I guarantee it'll be broken. Your Majesty, please don't talk about this. Ahem, sorry, when it comes to technical problems, I can't help it. Her voice became vague. Momo turned her head and vaguely saw that Nana seemed to be talking with His Majesty and Vendi. From time to time, Nana moved the knife in her hand back and forth, as if she wanted to experiment on her body. Cut? Saw? An axe? I'm sorry. She slowly closed her eyes. Vilain, I might not be able to see you again after this treatment. She fell asleep. Roland suddenly noticed that Momo had already closed her eyes and entered a stable state of sleep. Nana raised the scalpel and nodded to the two. Then I'll begin. She skillfully cut into the eye socket, removed the ugly old wound, and cleaned the damaged skin. Blood quickly seeped out and dyed the gauze red. Throughout the entire process, her arms were almost completely still. Only her fingertips and wrists were moving with precision. Unlike the treatment, this step could not be achieved by magic power. It was the result of Nana's training so far. Amazing, Vendi said in a low voice. It's all forced out. Nana twitched her mouth. When I was in the military camp, I could only stay for about half a minute for each patient. If I couldn't complete the emergency treatment in the shortest time possible, I probably wouldn't be able to save the later patients. That's why she's so straightforward. Roland could not help but sigh. You used to faint at the sight of blood, and those chickens, Your Majesty. Nana rolled her eyes at him. Don't ever mention that again. And you're the culprit. Fine. Roland waved his hand in surrender. Besides, the little girl paused. I think it's good to be like this. At least I'm much stronger than before, right? For a moment, Roland felt as if he had seen her again. Roland could not help but stroke her head. Of course. A few minutes later, Momo's eyes returned to normal. A bowl of sleeping fern will probably last for about 2 hours. Such a small amount of poison won't have too much of an effect on the witch, so we just have to wait for her to wake up naturally, Nana said, looking at Wendy. Thank you. The latter nodded with a smile. By the way, how much magic power do you have left? Roland deliberately pretended to be careless. Can you check for me? Wendy's complexion couldn't help but change, while Nana directly grabbed his arm. Are you hurt? I just feel that my nose gets stuffy recently. Then you should go to Lily. Nana withdrew her hand grumpily. I've checked, and there's no reaction from her ability. I think so too. Roland slightly tilted his head to avoid Wendy's puzzled gaze. It seems that Nana's ability is not omnipotent. Roland thought. I don't know if she can't cure those invisible, hidden diseases, or if the red unhealthy state is not a kind of injury. Anyway, I can only wait and find out. When Momo slowly opened her eyes, she saw a sea of red clouds. The overlapping clouds were turning from gold to purple and drifting away from the afterglow. She could hear the soft but continuous sound of the autumn wind blowing through the grass. Occasionally, she could see 1 or 2 blades of grass flying in the air and passing by her cheeks. Everything was peaceful and quiet. I'm still alive, Momo thought. However, Momo soon noticed something unusual. Her vision seemed to expand a lot, and the blurry scenes in the distance became clearer. She raised her head slightly and saw Thylane leaning over her with a smile. You're awake? Momo realized that she had been lying on her friend's lap and that they were on the lawn in front of the witch building. How long have I been asleep? Where's Wendy? She left after giving you to me, Thylane shrugged. Thylane shrugged and said, You probably slept for most of the afternoon. Although Wendy said that you would wake up in 2 hours, you don't have to worry. This is a common symptom after you recover your magic power. When you wake up naturally, your body will adapt better. Can you see with your new eyes? Momo sat up and looked around. Ever since her eyes were dug out, she had thought that she would always be in darkness. She had never expected that she could see again. What should I do, Thylane? She murmured. What do you mean? If that's the case, how are we going to repay them? Thylane was stunned for a moment and then chuckled. She looked up at the sky and said, I don't know. However, according to Sister Wendy, as long as we work hard, it should be a kind of repayment. By the way, when you were still asleep, Wendy had already arranged what I had to do. Together with Miss Nana Pine, who healed you, I'm going to provide medical care and treatment for Grey Castle. At this point, she scratched her nose and seemed a little embarrassed. Although I still don't quite understand what kind of treatment I can provide, but my ability. Momo clenched her fists. Sister Wendy also said that. She looked up in surprise. Really? Yes. Thylane nodded. And it was His Majesty's idea. He hopes that you can join the administrative office and work with Lady Scroll to run the kingdom. Huh? Momo could not believe her ears. Can I do that? You have to ask yourself that question, Thylane said as she gave Momo a push. I don't even know what I'm doing. But, as long as you learn, you'll figure it out eventually. I'm not as confident as you are. Momo murmured and leaned against Thylane's back. Do you think we can live here forever? Just like home? In fact, I asked Wendy the same question. After a moment of silence, Thylane's companion answered. Chapter 1282. A week later, Roland received 2 pieces of good news. First, Iron Axe used the napalm to give the demons a head-on blow, which temporarily slowed down the demons' advance in the north. In the letter, the commander-in-chief described the explosion of the new weapon in detail, which was even more amazing than the experimental results. In fact, the use of fire to restrain demons had been used as early as the first battle of Divine Will. At that time, human beings had set the forest behind the demons on fire many times and caused forest fires that lasted for several days, so that the red mist could not gather at the front line. Because of this, the demons learned their lesson and destroyed forests, grasslands, and even farmlands in order to prevent the demons' supplies from being interrupted. At the same time, even if they were in the area covered by the red mist, they would set up small stone tower camps similar to outposts, just in case. As long as there was red mist in the camps, even if there was a fire in the rear, the demons could hold on until the fire was put out. There was no doubt that Iron Axe and the general staff had been inspired by the above examples, which was why they had planned this siege. The advantage of napalm was that it carried its own fuel, which could cause a raging fire even in an open space, and it was extremely difficult to put out with water. However, no one had expected that the fire would not last long, and it would cause a deflagration that covered the whole city. If only I could ask Summer to reconstruct the scene, Roland thought regretfully. If he could find out the cause, he would be able to use napalm to deal a devastating blow to the demons in the future. Unfortunately, according to the time, the Tusk city should have been swallowed by the red mist again, so it was impossible to sneak in again. Moreover, Roland was quite distressed to use up more than 500 barrels of napalm at one time. After all, the production of oil could be increased as long as more manpower was invested. The key was that the rubber worm's mucus had an affinity with animal blood, which could only be slowly accumulated by the Ministry of Agriculture. Nevertheless, the victory was more important than anything else. In his reply, Roland not only encouraged Iron Axe, but also distributed more than 100 barrels of napalm to the front line. The second piece of good news was that the assembly factory of Fire of Heaven finally had its first biplane successfully rolled off the production line. After he got the news from Anna, he immediately rushed to the factory site with Tilly. This brand new factory was built at the same time as the Air Knight Academy. Compared to the steam engine factory built with bricks and stones 2 or 3 years ago, this new factory was designed to take into account the needs of high-end manufacturing. The steel structure made it have a very wide space inside, which could be used to assemble and repair more than 10 aircrafts at the same time. Lighting lamps hung all over the ceiling. Coupled with the bright and clean terrazzo floor, it could be described as magnificent. Even Tilly couldn't help but exclaim when she approached the factory gate. If it was someone who didn't know the inside story, it wouldn't be strange to think that this place was a palace. In terms of personnel and equipment, Roland had also put in a lot of effort. Not only did he transfer the most experienced managers and workers from various workshops, he also used the third generation of machine tools that were driven by electricity to meet the needs of cutting-edge production. This made it the largest power consumer in the industrial area. If not for the appearance of the Mystery Moon instrument, he would have had to suspend the power supply of other factories to make it run at full capacity. It could be said that the achievements and accumulation of Neverwinter in the past 5 years were all reflected in this new factory. Roland even heard from Barav that the people of Neverwinter were proud to work in this factory. According to the plan, when the new factory was officially put into operation, each of its workstations would undertake a specialized assembly task. From the first workstation to the last, it basically involved the whole process of the aircraft's gradual formation. The body of the aircraft would start from the riveting of the skeleton, attaching the wings, loading the spare parts, pasting the skin, and finally leaving the factory for testing. But now, the factory was far from reaching the ideal state. Apart from the workstation closest to the exit of the factory, where a Fire of Heaven was being painted, the other workstations were empty. How is it? Did the production run into trouble? Roland walked to Anna. Too many to count. Anna shook her head. You don't know how many spare parts and materials the workers have scrapped in order to make this qualified product. Looking at her helpless expression, he could not help but laugh. When he first made this decision, Roland had already anticipated the difficulties. It was almost impossible to master new materials and new installation techniques in a short period of time, and this was under the circumstance that he had tried his best to reduce the difficulty. For example, the joint parts of the aircraft used a new single-sided riveting technology. For this purpose, he specially set up a production line specifically for the production of various types of core rivets and core pulling rivets required for the biplane. Compared to the traditional double-sided rivets, this kind of joint could be fixed with only a knock or core pulling. It had lower requirements for the workers and was more convenient to install. In addition, he also used the experience of model assembly in the later generations for reference. While fixing all the parts with a fixed number, he expressed each assembly step in the form of a diagram. Furthermore, he set up a fool's interface on some easily confused parts to further reduce the possibility of carelessness leading to the wrong installation. Even so, in nearly half a month, the workers only managed to produce a finished product. One could imagine the difficulty. "So, did you personally participate?" Tilly suddenly asked. "Not really." Anna shrugged. She would only reveal this unsteady demeanor in front of a few people. "Roland asked me to only be responsible for commanding. No matter what trouble they encountered, I had to let them solve it themselves. Although there were several times when I almost couldn't control myself." Tilly laughed. "So you're actually very happy, aren't you? Because one of them was successful." Anna could not help but smile. "I knew I couldn't hide it from you. If there's one, there will be a second one. When all the workers get started, I think there will soon be more qualified aircraft." Speaking of this, Tilly paused, turned her head and glanced at Roland. "It would be even better if you praised her at this time. I didn't count on him." Anna curled her lips. Roland was confused. What was going on? Weren't they discussing the production of the aircraft? Why did the topic change to him? At this moment, a personal guard ran over. "Your Majesty, all the factory preparations for the first fire of heaven have been completed. The celebration ceremony can begin at any time." Roland shifted his attention back to the biplane. He saw two newly painted symbols on the light gray fuselage. One was the royal coat of arms of Grey Castle, and the other was a knight holding a spear and spreading his wings. The entire aircraft looked majestic, but he felt that something was missing. He pondered for a moment, then came to a sudden realization. He waved his hand and said, "Attach the ribbon." Soon, the bright red ribbon was attached to the aircraft, and a large red flower was attached to the propeller at the nose of the aircraft. "That's right." He nodded in satisfaction. This was the perfect condition for the fire of heaven to leave the factory. Following that was a speech, ribbon cutting, and a group photo. Roland, Anna, Tilly, and all the contributors and workers who had participated in the design and manufacture of the aircraft stood together. Behind them was the brand new red biplane numbered 001. "Look at me here. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 1283. Your Excellency, Frost Town is just ahead of us. A knight reported. Marwayne Parker raised his binoculars and observed the situation in the town. This place was located at the southwest border of the Kingdom of Everwinter and the Kingdom of Wolfheart. There were hills all around, and one could clearly see the situation in the town from any vantage point. Frost Town was easy to attack and difficult to defend, so it had never been built into a castle. There were many towns like this on the border between the two kingdoms, and there was nothing special about it. Normally, Marwayne wouldn't even spare it a second glance, but now, it had a unique significance. "Did you get any news from the scouts?" "I only spent a few silver royals, and the townspeople told me everything," the knight said proudly. "There's indeed a group of Grey Castle soldiers here. There aren't many of them, only about 40 to 50 people. They show up every once in a while. Why don't they station here? It's a mountain road after the border, and I heard that wild wolves often appear. Without an escort, none of the refugees will be able to cross the border." Marwayne immediately understood what was going on. The red mist did not spread along the border. Instead, it spread in an ever-expanding semicircle. The furthest part of the red mist had already passed the royal city of the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and the closest part was still in the Kingdom of Everwinter. Compared to going to a neighboring kingdom, it was more reassuring to fight within the kingdom. Frost Town not only met this requirement, but also because of its remote location, those who had been fooled by Grey Castle soldiers would rarely enter the Kingdom of Wolfheart from here. Frost Town was almost as inconspicuous as a mosquito's leg compared to the major cities with convenient transportation. What Marwayne wanted was precisely the small number of people. The small number of people meant that Grey Castle soldiers would not pay too much attention to this place, which was undoubtedly confirmed by the scouts. Just as the old scholar had said, the demons would deal with those who were difficult to deal with. What Marwain needed to do was to bite them where they were weak. As long as this matter was spread out, no matter how big or small the outcome of the battle was, it would make the other side hesitate in taking action. Of course, that was not all the old scholar's plan. There were even more ruthless tricks waiting for the people of Grey Castle. If he could succeed 2 or 3 times, he believed that the other party's plundering operation would suffer a great setback. Perhaps the Sky Lord would also rely on him more. Let's go back. It's time to have a good talk with everyone. After spending half a day on the road to the nearest town, Marwain entered the former lord's mansion in high spirits. This place originally belonged to a nameless baron, but not long ago he was so scared by the approaching red mist and the rumors of demons that he fled, which saved him a lot of time to negotiate. This land didn't belong to him yet. After all, his power was limited to the 4 cities of the northern region. However, Marwain believed that the Parker family's expansion wouldn't stop there. Soon, a group of nobles gathered together and waited for him to speak. The Duke looked around and silently memorized everyone's faces and expressions. There were a total of 45 applicants in the room. Most of them were knight, but there were also a few baron. The one with the highest status was the former lord of the northernmost port, Viscount Narnos. These people had either been forced to lose their territories or had all their people stolen by the people of Grey Castle. With the promise of fiefdom as a reward, they did not hesitate to pledge their allegiance to him. If the guards, trusted aides, and squires that they had brought with them were also included, the number of soldiers in this army was already more than 300. They had the advantage in numbers, so this was obviously an excellent opportunity. More importantly, for the first time, there was no difference in weapons between them and their opponents. In the past, the nobles of Everwinter had been unable to put up a fight because the firearms of the people of Grey Castle were too ferocious. The speed and range of their fire were far beyond that of their imitation snow powder weapons. If not for this batch of reinforcements from the Sky Lord, no nobles would be willing to help him fight against the people of Grey Castle, let alone 300 people. How is everyone's preparation going? Marwain cleared his throat. I believe your men are familiar with those firearms, right? Isn't it just loading bullets into the gun, aiming at the target, and pulling the trigger? Viscount Narnos said indignantly. Those things that even the farmers in the mountains can use, there's no reason we can't use them. Those guys who were captured had to be tortured heavily before they confessed, and they even spoke hesitantly and unwillingly. I thought they were nothing special. That's right. It's true that they're exquisite and beyond our reach, but when it comes to using them, they're much easier than swords. A knight echoed. I've also interrogated the people of Grey Castle. They've only been in the army for 2 years and can usually learn how to use firearms in a month, but I've spent 5 years just practicing with my sword. A month is because those untouchables are too slow. If it were me, 3 days would be enough. Another person's comment caused a burst of laughter. I'll let them know that without firearms, they're nothing. Aren't firearms all thanks to the witches? I think the king of Grey Castle just took advantage of the time when the church was sweeping through the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart. The hearts of the people were useful. Marwain realized that these nobles had been suppressing their anger for a long time and were eager to take revenge on the people of Grey Castle. Although this mixed team had just been put together a week ago and some of them did not even know each other's names, at least they had the same goal and were full of vigor. However, the number of those crossbow bolts is limited, and the number of bullets distributed to each of us is even smaller. The knight who had followed him before spread out his hands and said, If possible, I hope you can use them sparingly and only open fire when the distance is close. Marwain looked at him approvingly. This man was called Fuller, a native of the western region. He had brought him here because he liked his quick-wittedness. From these words, Marwain knew that Fuller had already grasped the key to victory. It would be great if he could find a chance to recruit him. Don't worry, the Duke said confidently. The people of Grey Castle don't have many bullets either. There are many mountains in the northwest of the kingdom of Wolfheart, which limits their carrying capacity. Besides, they'll let us get close. Isn't it their slogan to escort the refugees out of danger? The others also sneered. That's right. As long as the enemies came to rob people, they would definitely not give up on this wave of easily obtained lambs. However, they did not know that sometimes the wolf pack would also hide among them. In this world, the hunter often became the prey in the blink of an eye. By the time they realized that it was a trap, they would already be trapped in a cage. After that, as long as they disguised themselves as the enemies and looted the towns along the way, the propaganda of the people of Grey Castle would definitely collapse. If they did this a few more times, they wouldn't be able to pull another person away. Chapter 1284. When Fishball climbed over the rugged hilltop, the view in front of him suddenly became clear. Orange-yellow wildflowers were blooming all over the ground, forming a sharp contrast with the barren mountain path. When the autumn wind blew, waves would appear in the sea of flowers. This kind of beautiful scenery created by nature would always be able to lift the spirits of tired travelers. The town in the middle of the sea of flowers was their destination, Frost Town. This was the 6th time he had crossed the valley. Although Fishball was the squad leader of the High Gear Squad, he was also a soldier of the First Army. With the order to speed up the evacuation, many soldiers like him also joined the emergency rescue. Since the evacuation, the demons had not attacked this route. Perhaps it was because it was too far away from the red mist, or the demons did not care about the refugees. But no matter what, every person he brought back to Neverwinter was a force to be reckoned with in Neverwinter. Meanwhile, he had already brought nearly 1,000 people to the rear. According to the usual practice, this team would set up camp outside the town and then send someone to negotiate with the remaining refugees before evacuating them in batches. When they first came here, the First Army had warned the residents that the road ahead was dangerous and it was best not to go south without permission. As long as they waited in the town for a few days, the army of Grey Castle would escort them out. Of course, not everyone would believe this. In fact, Fishball had encountered many refugees on the way. They either ran out of food or were driven into a corner by wild beasts. However, this was already a relatively lucky outcome. Those who were even more unlucky died silently in the valley. But this time, Fishball noticed something different. Looking down from the hillside, he saw that the Frost Town, which had always been sparsely populated, was now crowded. Did a big city collapse? Hansen, a scout in the same team, whistled. So many refugees in just 10 days. We're going to be very busy. Fishball was also very excited. Previously, he had only gathered about 1,000 people after 1 or 2 months. This time, he believed that they would be able to catch up with or even surpass the previous number. Although he did not know why these refugees did not choose other routes but gathered in this town at the bottom of the valley, as long as they were here, the First Army had the obligation to take them to a safe place. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but quicken their pace. Going downhill was much easier than going uphill. Half an hour later, the team arrived at the camp in Frost Town. The refugees in the town also noticed their arrival. Many people rushed to the streets and quickly gathered into a stream of people, rushing in their direction. These people, aren't they a little too impatient? Someone joked. Didn't I tell them to wait in the town? Could it be that they've run out of food and are hoping to get some food from us? Most of the people agreed with this statement. If it's really a disaster in a nearby city, it's normal that they didn't bring enough food. Fishball quickly made a decision. But it's not good for us to do a head count and maintain order, so we still have to stop them. 10 of you will help me set up the checkpoint. The rest of you will be on guard. He knew very well how terrifying it would be if the crowd went out of control. If they could not stop the refugees, the begging would turn into a robbery, and these people would be no different from bandits. Most of the time, these two types of people were separated by a thin line. Yes. The soldiers quickly spread out and held the guns on their backs in their hands. As the distance between the two sides shortened, the figures of the refugees became clearer. Fishball raised the megaphone, turned it to the loudest volume, and shouted, This is the rescue team of the First Army of Greycastle. Please don't panic. Stop immediately and stay where you are for further instructions. We have enough food and medicine, but we need your cooperation to distribute them. I repeat, stop, or we'll take forceful measures. The crowd hesitated for a moment, but soon they started running again as if something was pushing them from behind. Fishball frowned and asked his teammates to aim their guns at the sky, ready to fire a warning shot. Just then, Hansen let out a soft cry. Huh? What's wrong? Fishball asked. Monitor, their clothes seem a little strange. Hansen said while observing through the telescope. Have you ever seen a refugee carrying a roll of cloth? A roll of cloth? Fishball was puzzled. He snatched the telescope and looked at the crowd. The distance between the two sides was about 300 meters, and he could roughly see their clothes and belongings through the telescope. From the way they were dressed, they were indeed a group of runaways in dire straits. But just as the scout had said, most of them had a long or short strip of cloth on their bodies. Some of them were carried on their backs, while others were hung at their waists. It was strange no matter how one looked at it. It was human nature for refugees to take all their belongings with them before they fled. The First Army would usually ask them to abandon their luggage and travel light, but they would not interfere with things that would not cause trouble or inconvenience to the migration, such as gold royals. Over the past 2 months, Fishball had seen many strange belongings, but this was the first time he had seen a roll of cloth. But the more he looked, the more he felt that something was wrong. The refugees were dressed in rags, and they were all wearing shoes. Their ragged clothes did not look old at all, but looked like they had been damaged recently. The distance between the two sides was now less than 200 meters. Bang! His teammates fired a warning shot. The crowd immediately dispersed, and a scene that made Fishball's blood freeze appeared. Probably startled by the gunshot, several people at the front of the line hurriedly pulled off the cloth, revealing the standard-issue rifle of the First Army. This action seemed to set off a wave in the crowd, and the others followed suit. Those cloth strips of different lengths were actually used to hide weapons, and the things wrapped under them ranged from swords to halberds. It could be said that there was everything one could think of. He suddenly realized that this was a trap. Retreat to the camp. Fishball shouted at his teammates. Run! Before his voice died away, a series of gunshots came from the other side. Fishball could even hear the whooshing sound of bullets flying past his ears, and from time to time, the surrounding grass splashed with mud. The other 9 people also came to their senses, and they all turned around and rushed back to the camp. The team had camped there several times. Although there were no blockhouses or trenches, the simple sandstone barracks were still there. It was originally built to defend against the demons, but now it was the only shelter on the empty hillside. When Fishball crawled and ran into the barracks, there was no one left standing. Compared to the incessant gunshots from the opposite side, the return fire from the camp was very scattered. Compared to the 9 people who had set up the barracks, the team of more than 40 people was obviously a more eye-catching target. Fishball's heart almost jumped out of his throat when he thought that they would probably be shot at while they were defenseless. He grabbed Hansen and said, "Quick, go and check on the others." After Hansen ran away with his body crouched, Fishball raised his gun and aimed at the refugees, who were surrounding them from all directions. No, they were definitely not refugees, but nobles who had defected to the demons. Only the demons could have so many weapons from the First Army. Damn it, Fishball thought bitterly. He never expected that his own kind would use the refugees to set up such a trap. Don't they know whose accomplice they are? Squad leader, Hansen came back faster than Fishball had expected, and it only took him a few seconds. Everyone is fine. Only one person is slightly injured, but it's been bandaged. It won't affect the battle. Fishball was stunned. Only one person is injured? The gunshots were so fierce just now. Chapter 1285. That's right, they had to hold on. Behind the campsite was a gentle hillside, so it was almost impossible to retreat to the hilltop under the hail of bullets. Moreover, the rescue teams had split up, so they could not get reliable support in a short period of time. In such a disadvantageous situation, Holding on was the only way to inflict the greatest damage to the enemy. After all, the difference in numbers between the two sides was too great. Moreover, everyone's backpack was filled with food, clothes, and other supplies, and they did not even bring a single heavy machine gun. As a result, the weapons on both sides were basically at the same level, and it was difficult to rely on long-range firepower to make up for the lack of numbers like in the past. 50 versus 1,000. Fishball could already foresee the result. He admitted that he was still a little afraid when this idea popped up in his mind, but he was no longer a coward who could only cover his head and cower. Fear would not affect his duty as a squad leader. Even if he were to die here, he would make the other party pay the price. Obviously, his teammates had the same idea, or else they would not have deliberately suppressed their shooting speed and let the enemy come within 200 meters of them. They had limited bullets, so they could only achieve the best hit rate when fighting at a medium or close range. Of course, the enemy's accuracy would also increase as the distance shortened. This was a double-edged sword, and willpower determined everything. The hillside slowed down the enemy's movement. Fishball waited for nearly a minute before he saw someone enter the 100-meter radius. At this distance, he could already see the faces of the sneak attackers through the telescope. This once again confirmed his previous conjecture. Most of them had clean faces and did not look like refugees who had been fleeing in the wind and rain. Their actions and expressions did not show any signs that they were being forced. He no longer had to worry about killing innocent people. Fishball aimed at the enemy at the front and pulled the trigger. His teammates also chose to open fire at the same time. For a moment, the sound of gunfire in the campsite suddenly drowned out the enemy's movements. In the blink of an eye, the attackers at the front fell, and the momentum of the attack was immediately halted. The surrounding enemies all lay down and fired back at the First Army. It was unknown whether they had learned this method from previous battles or if they had been taught by the demons, but the situation became a mutual shooting. While the two sides were in a deadlock, the enemies at the back pushed several two-wheeled carts covered with cloth to the front line. Fishball was no stranger to this kind of thing. Compared to carriages and mules, handcarts that relied on human labor were more suitable for ordinary people, especially when the whole family was moving and needed to carry large amounts of goods. He had originally thought that they were just props used by the enemy to conceal their identity, but he did not expect that after they started charging, the enemy still did not give up on these cumbersome carts. It wasn't until the cloth was lifted that Fishball realized that the cart was actually carrying a Mark I HMG. Da-da-da. The rapid firing immediately suppressed the firepower of the First Army, and the bullets equipped with tracer effects were much more accurate than those of bolt rifles. It was as if the area in front of the camp was boiling. The grassland full of blooming wildflowers and soil were splattered everywhere. If not for the defense of the camp, they would have lost the ability to fight back. Fortunately, the enemy didn't set up a machine gun position at the furthest point, but instead threw it into the assault. Now that the machine guns were only about 200 meters away from the defensive line, and the First Army was spread out far enough, this gave them a chance to catch their breath. "Hansen!" Fishball yelled. Hansen gestured that he understood and ran to the edge of the camp with his rifle. The First Army rarely encountered a situation where they were at a disadvantage in firepower. According to the regulations in the combat manual, once they were at a disadvantage in firepower, they should call for backup from the rear as soon as possible, or specifically target the enemy's firepower to counterattack. Obviously, the only action the rescue team could take at this time was to use efficient and accurate sniping to deter the enemy's attack. While the machine guns were reloading, Fishball and his teammates raised their heads and fired ferociously, trying to attract the enemy's attention. Hansen did not disappoint. He shot down the shooters on the cart with 2 shots. Those who wanted to climb onto the cart were also shot down one by one. Without the suppression of the machine guns, the enemy who had taken advantage of the momentum to charge forward were beaten back by a round of gunfire before they could run more than 10 steps. The battle was back to square one. Damn it, why haven't these useless people conquered the camp yet? Marwain looked up at the gradually setting sun and stamped his feet impatiently. Viscount Narnos, aren't your men too timid? They can't even take down a flank. If this drags on until nightfall, the Grey Castle people will escape. As commanders, they naturally did not have to rush to the front line like squires and mercenaries. Moreover, the Grey Castle people never followed the rules of War of the Nobles. They did not deliberately hold back or exchange their captives for ransom. None of that existed. They had long seen how the Grey Castle people treated the nobles. If they led the charge like before, they would not receive any honor or respect, but would only be the first to be shot full of holes. They've tried their best, and your men aren't any better, Narnos said discontentedly. They have the most men, but the front line is the furthest back. If your central force could advance another 100 steps, the camp would have been conquered long ago. Marwain was speechless. He could only look at the front line gloomily, but he remembered this hatred in his heart. When I become the Lord of Everwinter, I'll make you pay. But the most important thing now was to win. Without victory, the Sky Lord would not treat him differently. But he did not understand why the situation had become so stalemate. Everything went smoothly according to plan. In order to prevent the Grey Castle people from discovering a flaw, they did not choose to set up an ambush in the town, nor did they split up to outflank the enemy. In this valley, the strength and arrangement of both sides could be seen at a glance. Marwain had carefully considered any detail that could lead to exposure. As for the townspeople who might leak the news, he did not let any of them escape. And that was how things developed. By the time the Grey Castle people realized something was wrong, the distance between the two sides had already shortened to a few hundred steps. Since they outnumbered the enemy with guns and had far more men, the battle should have ended quickly. But why was the stalemate so long and they still could not break into the camp? Even if the enemy had 1 gun each, there would only be about 50 guns, while the allied forces of the nobles had more than 200 guns. In Marwain's imagination, the Grey Castle people should have been scared out of their wits when faced with such fierce firepower. But what he saw seemed to be the other way around. The allied forces were pressed down on the hillside and could not move. Several times, they charged forward but were repelled by the intense gunfire. The counterattack of the allied forces was not enough to weaken the defense of the Grey Castle people. It was as if the enemy had 3 heads and 6 arms and could control a few guns at the same time. The continuous firing guns that he had high hopes for were even more useless. Not only did they not destroy the will of the Grey Castle people, but they also hit their own people when they charged. Looking from the foot of the hillside, he saw that the continuous firing guns that he had painstakingly transported up the hill were surrounded by corpses. No one dared to touch them anymore. If this continued, wouldn't the beautiful future that he had been looking forward to turn into a bubble? After all, the kingdom of Everwinter could not produce bullets. If he could not seize enough ammunition in this battle, how would he have the chance to bite a piece of meat off the Grey Castle people in the next battle? Don't be impatient, my lord, Fleur comforted him. According to my observation, the enemy's gunfire has become much more sparse than before. Obviously, they are running out of ammunition. As long as we hold on a little longer, we can use the method that we are best at to win. After all, they only have guns, but we have everything. Chapter 1286. Fishball noticed the change in the battle situation. He had been fighting with the mentality that he would knock out the enemy even if he had to die, but the pressure from the enemy was much lower than he had expected. When he fought the demons on the fertile plains, the pressure on the battlefield almost made it hard for him to breathe. His whole body was as stiff as a rock, and the only thought in his mind was to shoot. But now, he still had the energy to observe the situation of his teammates and the enemy, and to think about the enemy's possible actions. After being forced to retreat several times, the enemy's movements became much more sluggish. The most obvious point was that the First Army's firing interval had lengthened. In order to conserve ammunition, they usually only fired when the nobles' army charged, but the last time they fired was an hour ago. Since the enemy had not sent any reinforcements, this kind of stalemate of neither advancing nor retreating was definitely a taboo. After all, the First Army was positioned halfway down the slope, and they had the cover of the sandstone barracks, so they had a much greater advantage in firing. He did not quite understand why the commander of the nobles would make such a choice. Unlike cold weapons, no contact did not mean that there was no battle. Those ambushers were under the pressure of being hit at every moment, and this was undoubtedly a blow to their morale. Some of the front lines did not advance, but retreated instead. Fishball saw with his own eyes that some of the enemies had retreated nearly 100 meters from their original positions. Now, the entire front line was like a zigzag wave. This also revealed that the enemy was not a complete unit, but a temporary patchwork of several teams. In addition, Fishball also noticed that the enemy might not be that good at using flintlocks. Although they were obviously imitating the First Army, they did not make full use of the weapons in their hands. Otherwise, they would not have lasted until now. Although it sounded inconceivable, the team had yet to lose a single person in battle, and only 5 were injured. This could not be explained by pure luck. Can someone give me some bullets? I'm almost out of ammo. Me too. I only have 1 clip left. What should we do next, Monitor? Hansen ran back and asked, there are no more enemies around the machine guns. Should we retreat after nightfall? Fishball looked up at the sky. It was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun set faster in late autumn, and it would be dark in an hour and a half. At that time, the threat of the enemy's firearms would be greatly reduced. Even if they had their backs to direct fire, they would still have a chance. But perhaps it was because he had been running away for too long, so he always thought more about retreating. It was true that the darkness of the night had weakened the accuracy of the muskets, but the First Army would also lose their greatest reliance. More importantly, if the enemy regained their morale because of this move and chased after them, would they be able to repel them again? Of course, if they had enough ammo, the squad might be able to retreat before the attackers could react. However, based on the current situation, the nobles would soon notice that the firing rate in the camp was no longer what it used to be, and it would not be difficult to guess their next move. What's more, 2 of the 5 injured were heavily injured. Retreating with injured teammates would definitely slow them down. Fishball would never abandon his teammates. He hesitated for a while and finally made up his mind. Call the others over. I have something to say. Not long after, Hansen gathered his teammates who were scattered on the front line. The enemy did not seem to notice that the First Army's shooting points had become more concentrated. They were still crouching on the grass and occasionally fired a shot. This further strengthened Fishball's conviction. He briefly explained the situation and then looked around. His Majesty always said that attack is always the best defense. If we can defeat these nobles in one fell swoop, we won't have to worry about whether we stay or leave. But if we do the opposite, the enemy may have a chance to bite us back. Now it's time to make a decision. We can leave our fate to the enemy, or we can control it ourselves. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Monitor, do you mean we should take the initiative to attack? Hansen was stunned. They outnumber us. I've thought about it. They seem to have the advantage in numbers, but most of them have lost the will to fight. It's just that long-range shooting won't make them realize that they're going to lose. If we can defeat their strongest team, maybe we can completely destroy their will to fight. But we're running out of bullets. The First Army is not an army that only relies on guns to fight. The combat manual emphasized this point, Fishball said in a low voice. After a moment of silence, Hansen was the first to speak. I'll listen to you. That's right, Monitor. I don't want to leave anyone behind. Either we all go or we all stay. Give the order, Monitor. Everyone shouted. Fishball nodded solemnly. He would never have thought that he would make such a decision in the past. He had only been in the army for 4 years, but he felt that something had changed in him. You're not a coward. A sweet and melodious voice rang in his ears. He took a deep breath and said word by word, Everyone, put on the bayonet. The structure of the gun had changed from the oldest flintlock rifle to the bolt rifle, but the bayonet had never been removed. The only difference was that it was more useful than before. The soldiers drew their swords from their sheaths and inserted them into the jaws. Fishball inserted the last clip into the barrel, raised his arm and shouted, Follow me. He took the lead and jumped out of the camp. The other teammates followed him and rushed toward the enemy closest to the front line. The enemies obviously did not realize what had happened. Many of them did not even get up from the ground but continued to shoot at the first army in a clumsy posture. Fishball was prepared to be shot, but the pain he expected never came. The distance of more than 100 meters was covered in the blink of an eye. Only then did the enemy stand up as if he had just woken up from a dream. He stood there with his rifle in his hand, not knowing what to do. He stabbed the bayonet into the chest of the first enemy according to the posture he had practiced in training. Kill! His teammates also rushed forward and rushed into the crowd while they were descending the mountain. Shouts and screams rang out across the hillside. Fishball stabbed one down and shot another dead. When he turned around and stabbed the third, he found that there were no new targets around him. He looked around and found that the enemies had already begun to flee. They probably did not expect that the first army would rush out of the camp and engage in close combat with them. The last string in their hearts was broken. When enemies met on a narrow path, the braver ones would win. The allied forces of the nobles, who had been clenching their teeth for a long time, did not put up much resistance before they all collapsed. When the troops at the front fled, panic spread through the entire army like a plague. The teams that were already retreating threw down the weapons in their hands and fled down the mountain in a panic. Many of them even lost their footing and rolled down the mountain, knocking down a bunch of their companions who were running in front of them. When the heavy machine guns fell into the hands of the first army and turned their muzzles to shoot at the crowd running down the mountain, the enemies hated themselves even more for not having two legs. If it were not for the fact that the machine guns did not have many bullets to begin with, they might not have been able to escape. Fishball did not know how far he had chased them until his legs became weak and he slowly stopped. The surviving enemies on the hillside all knelt on the ground and raised their hands to surrender. The nobles who had been lingering in the back ran faster than anyone else and were almost invisible now. He clenched his fists and felt an indescribable joy in his heart. However, before he could savor the joy, his teammates rushed up and pushed him to the ground. "Monitor, we won. Long live His Majesty. Long live the First Army." Everyone lifted him up and threw him high into the air. That's right, they won. Everyone had survived. There was no better ending than this. Fishball opened his arms to the setting sun and joined the cheers of victory with everyone else. Chapter 1287. Sedimentation Bay, Kingdom of Wolfheart. Iron Axe soon heard of the victory of this counter-ambush. He immediately sent a messenger to express his appreciation and encouragement to the Fishball squad, asking them to temporarily return to safety and wait for the arrival of the reinforcements. Although the Fishball squad had defeated the allied forces of the old nobles, their unflinching performance and their willpower were excellent examples of propaganda. Compared to continuing to rescue the refugees, it was obviously more meaningful for them to publicize their deeds, especially when the First Army was withdrawing. Not long ago, he received two pieces of bad news. First, the soldiers lurking in the red mist reported that the nobles had taken over the demon's job. According to the report, the knight from many families of the Kingdom of Everwinter was intercepting the refugees. As the same kind, their coercion and temptation were undoubtedly much more effective than that of the foreign races. The First Army would take a great risk in entering the Red Mist area. Most of the time, they could only rescue the refugees from the periphery. As a result, the number of people at the evacuation points had decreased to varying degrees. Second, the demons had once again intensified their attacks on the First Army. This was a complete battle report. First, a sentry post had observed a large number of devil beasts flying out of the Red Mist area from the southeast and heading towards Archduke Island. Then, the island's garrison had made preparations for defense and had cut off sea transportation. But unexpectedly, the group of devil beasts suddenly disappeared in the airspace between two observation posts. When they reappeared, they were already on top of an evacuation team. The team had also received the news that the devil beasts were heading east and was working overtime to evacuate the people. As a result, they were exposed to the demons without any cover. Although the team put up a great resistance, they were still completely annihilated. There was still no complete statistical report, but according to the reinforcement team, nearly 2,000 refugees were killed in the attack and the army had lost at least 100 people. Such a heavy loss forced Iron Axe to make a decision to withdraw the battle line. The two pieces of bad news could be said to be a chain reaction. The general staff had considered the possibility of the nobles' betrayal, but they did not expect it to happen so quickly. The big families of the kingdom of Everwinter had been fighting for nearly 2 years without a new king. Now they were united under the will of the demons, which was quite ironic. The current situation was very obvious. The Great Migration phase was coming to an end, and the First Army needed to accumulate strength to defend the border area covered by the Red Mist. Currently, about 5,000 soldiers had arrived at the Cage Mountain and the Sedimentation Bay, which was less than 1/6 of the total number of soldiers. Since he did not know how many soldiers the demons could mobilize, he could not afford to lose any more soldiers before he figured out the enemy's situation. What worried Iron Axe the most was that when the First Army had limited transportation and insufficient troops, the demons would concentrate their army to attack the nodes that had yet to be defended. In that case, the First Army would be caught in a dilemma where it would be impossible to defend or rescue them. After all, in the kingdom of Wolfheart, there were no mobile fortresses, like armored trains that they could rely on. "Sir." At this time, a guard walked into the mansion's study. "The ship of Lady Edith Kant, the Minister of the General Staff, has just arrived at the port." Iron Axe raised his eyebrows. He was just thinking of someone to share his worries with, and now the person to share his worries had come by herself. "Coincidentally, I'm free. I'll go to the port to pick her up." At the port, Iron Axe saw the Pearl of the Northern region surrounded by the members of the General Staff. All of them looked liberated and seemed to have completely forgotten the horrible experience she had when they were tortured by her. It had only been about a year since she became the minister, but she had already won the respect and approval of the staff. Iron Axe thought of the nobles in the kingdom of Everwinter and the kingdom of Wolfheart, and then looked at the former daughter of a duke. He could not help but sigh inwardly. "Commander-in-Chief." Edith also saw Iron Axe. She put her hand on her chest and saluted. "Long time no see. I hope my subordinates didn't cause you any trouble. They've all fulfilled their responsibilities in the line of duty." Iron Axe returned a military salute. They were basically equal in status, so there was no misunderstanding between them. In other words, apart from His Majesty and Lady Silvermoon, Edith was the only person he was willing to talk to. In other words, they didn't give you any surprises? Edith shrugged and turned to look at the staff. "It seems that you haven't performed well recently." Iron Axe could not help but smile. This Pearl of the Northern region was still as unforgiving as before. "It's not a bad thing if we can win the war steadily." Edith did not pursue the matter further. Instead, she changed the topic. "By the way, this time I came with a new weapon developed by His Majesty according to the frontline intelligence. Are you interested in taking a look?" Iron Axe's eyes immediately lit up. "Of course. Please lead the way." They came to the heavily guarded loading area, which had been isolated by the garrison. Huge wooden boxes were being lowered from the ships and neatly placed in a corner of the yard. Many of the boxes had been opened, revealing the weapons wrapped in oiled paper. Iron Axe's attention was quickly drawn to a small cannon. "Good choice," Edith said with a smile. "This 75mm cannon is the most expensive firearm in this shipment. His Majesty hopes to use it to fill the firepower gap between the mortars and the long-song cannons. It doesn't need a witch to transport it. It can be assembled on 4 wheels and can be pulled by a horse or 2 people. The cannonballs can also be carried by people. This reminds me of the original front-mounted field artillery." Iron Axe nodded. He immediately understood the use of this portable weapon. Compared with the short-range anti-demon grenades and mortars, the new cannon was obviously more suitable to deal with the thick-skinned spider demons. Even if they did not have time to set up artillery positions, the frontline soldiers would not be helpless against the spider demons. "As for the new rifle over there, it's a semi-automatic weapon," Edith introduced as they walked. Edith explained as they walked. "The results of the test were pretty good. 2 or 3 guns can achieve the same effect as a heavy machine gun. You must be familiar with the person who came up with this idea. He's Venu, the commander of the artillery battalion. Although the official product has been improved by His Majesty, it's still called the Van or rifle. But it's only a temporary substitute. I heard that the real automatic weapon is currently in the trial production stage. When the finished product comes out, it'll be shipped here immediately. The one on the far side is the new anti-demon grenade. Its caliber is much larger than the previous one. I think the Ministry of Chemical Industry has improved the propellant. The visitors gradually dispersed. When they walked all the way to the edge of the yard, only Iron Axe and Iron Axe were left. What's wrong? Is the war not going well? Edith suddenly asked. Iron Axe was startled. Only then did he realize that it was not a coincidence that Edith had brought him here alone. You saw it? If not, you wouldn't have come to the dock to welcome me. I can't hide it from you. Iron Axe exhaled and told Edith about the recent bad news and what he was worried about. Before the transportation channel is opened, it'll take us several months to gather all the troops and ammunition here. However, the demons may launch an attack from somewhere at any time. Even if Miss Sylvie, Lightning, and Maggie are here, they won't be able to monitor such a wide front. The war is imminent, but I know so little about the enemy. This is not a good sign. I see. Edith pondered for a moment. As for the transportation channel, I can't do anything about it. But in terms of intelligence, it may not be so difficult. You have an idea? Sort of. You only think about using the First Army to solve the problem. That's why it's so tricky. The Pearl of the Northern Region said slowly. The demons seem to be killing many birds with one stone by driving the nobles to serve them, but it also creates an opportunity for us. As long as the demons don't wipe out every city, we can plant a large number of eyes in the belly of the enemy. Iron Axe seemed to realize something. These eyes aren't soldiers of the First Army. Chapter 1288. When Roland received the report, which was jointly signed by the First Army and the General Staff, he immediately thought of the classic plots of spy movies. Obviously, this was a highly feasible plan. He even considered more than Edith. Although the profession of spy had existed since ancient times and had different names in different eras, the concept and image that he was familiar with were gradually formed during World War I and World War II. Before that, most of the intelligence transmission was simple two-way communication, and there was no strict system. As the government became more and more controlled over the people, it became more and more difficult for spies to survive, so it became complicated and systematic. This also meant that the loose control system, which was ruled by the feudal lords, could not eradicate the existence of spies. As long as the spies were trained in the most basic professional knowledge and cut off the connections between the upper and lower levels, they would not be able to find the spies even if they turned the entire city upside down to look for them. After all, for the lower lines who provided intelligence, the upper line was simply a shadowy figure that they had never seen before. If it were Nightingale, she would not be able to get any information from the lower lines. Roland immediately approved the plan. However, he did not intend to completely leave this matter to Edith. This had nothing to do with trust. Espionage required a lot of planning and arrangement. He valued the Pearl of the Northern Region strategy and the overall situation, which was rare in this era. If he spent his energy on this matter, it would be putting the cart before the horse. Professional matters could be left to professionals to handle. He spread out a new piece of paper and wrote the name Hill Fox at the head of the letter. The political situation in the Kingdom of Dawn had basically stabilized, so this circus leader should be a little bored. After asking Nightingale to pass the letter to Honey, Roland began to consider another matter. That was the intelligence network. In the beginning, the information that he had to deal with, be it war or political affairs, was basically limited to the territory of Grey Castle. Since the beginning of the Tequila expedition, there had been a significant delay in flying messengers. Fortunately, at that time, the Seagull glider could go back and forth to the front in one day, so it was acceptable to use it as a supplement. But now that the main battlefield was between the kingdom of Wolfheart and the kingdom of Everwinter, the inconvenience of communication was particularly prominent. For example, the report in his hand was sent to him by sea, but it was signed a week ago. Replying by animal messenger would be quicker, but it would still take 2 or 3 days. More importantly, Honey did not control many messengers that could perform long-distance flights of more than 1,000 kilometers. After all, she could only make the animals obey her orders, but she could not change their inherent habits. Besides, there was a limit to the number of short-distance messengers. Honey's magic power was not enough to support the communication needs of the entire western region, let alone the whole country and beyond. When those spies started to operate, how to send the information back quickly and safely was also a big problem that needed to be solved urgently. Roland knew in his heart that the ultimate solution was to send a wireless message. Although the principle of a wired telegraph was simpler, it was limited by the attenuation of the line. It was no different from the telephone that was currently used. Even if the distance was doubled, it would only be 100 kilometers. If it was any further, it would require the addition of a repeater, such as an electron tube that could amplify the signal. The problem was that if he could make an electron tube, the wireless signal would not be out of reach. In this era, there was no concept of electromagnetic pollution. The modulated electromagnetic wave was just like a baby's cry in the silent night. As long as an antenna was set up on the impassable mountain range, it would not be difficult for it to transmit over 1,000 kilometers. If he could successfully make a wireless telegraph, it would only take a few minutes for the frontline report to be sent to his desk. If he could go one step further and equip the entire army with portable wireless telegraphs, its strategic significance would be no less than that of the Dawn Project. Of course, although he was clear about it, he had no idea how to do it. Maybe it's time to find a few more projects for the Design Bureau of Grey Castle, Roland thought. After entering the dream world at night, he first sent Zero off to school and then drove to the Three Leaves construction site in the southern suburbs of the city. Roland had to admit that Guard was indeed a straightforward businessman. As long as he had promised something, he would execute it immediately. Guard not only handed over the management of the factory to Roland, but also gave him a set of maintenance services, including painting the rusty walls and pillars, replacing the office equipment, and so on. Guard did not seem to be perfunctory at all. If it were not for the fact that the Clover Group was unwilling to give up the land of the tube-shaped department, Roland would have liked to have more dealings with such people. He parked the car and found that the open space outside the factory was a little strange. Usually, few people visited this place, but today, there were many construction workers. At the same time, he heard a series of dull roars, as well as the unique sound of reciprocating mechanical collisions. Roland quickly walked through the crowd and saw a strange-looking caterpillar machine. It was obvious that this machine was still a semi-finished product, and only part of it had been completed. If one only looked at the caterpillar and the load wheels, there was nothing special about it. The reason why it attracted the attention of the construction workers was that there was a steam piston system above it and another tractor that provided steam for it. Seeing this, Roland could not help laughing out loud. It turned out that this was the method that Master Xie had come up with. In order to minimize the impact of the imaginary boiler and water tank, he had installed all the equipment on another tractor. During the test, the two tractors had to run side by side for the steam engine to run. In the eyes of outsiders, this was equivalent to a tractor that not only had to ensure that it could run on its own, but it also had to provide power for another test product. It was almost the same as a solar flashlight that would only work when there was light, but never when there was no light. Ahem. Boss, you're here, Master Xie greeted Roland awkwardly, seeming to feel that it was stupid to do this. However, Roland did not mind it at all. Well done. This is exactly what I want. He came to the factory almost every other week to check on the progress. The last time he came, the tractor was just an empty frame, but this time, it could already run on its own. Roland could tell that Master Xie had really put a lot of effort into this project. Is that so? Master Xie touched his bald head. Are you sure that your collector friends will be interested in this thing? The main parts of the test product were all processed by the factory lathe, right? Yes, I can guarantee that. Master Xie quickly rubbed his hands and said, but the other tractor, boiler, water tank, and other equipment were all bought secondhand. It cost me about 300,000 yuan so far. Chapter 1289. Master Xie immediately beamed with joy, but the woman beside her sighed softly. Roland naturally noticed this as well. Ever since the dream world absorbed the core cyclones many times, his power had been constantly increasing, and his perception and acuity had risen to a new level. Although the woman was very discreet, Roland could still see her out of the corner of his eye. This woman was Qing, the secretary and treasurer sent by guard. It was said that she had just graduated from a famous school. Her talent and ability were above average, and she was quite pretty. She was the kind of person who had won at the starting line. She was the only one in the entire factory who knew that the Clover Group was responsible for all the expenses, and the current boss was basically not a dime. In Qing's eyes, Roland was probably trying to take advantage of the Clover Group and take advantage of the employer. It was understandable that she looked angry. However, Roland did not care. As long as he dragged Qing down with him, all her complaints would vanish. Of course, it's all thanks to everyone's hard work. He smiled at the secretary and said, if it's successful, I'll give all the employees in the factory a month's salary. That's right. Boss, you're so thoughtful. Master Xie nodded. No, that's not what I meant. Qing did not expect that Roland would notice her little trick. She said awkwardly, I was just wondering when the company would be profitable. If everything went well, that day would never come. Roland waved his hand calmly and said, don't worry. My friends are all people who pursue their dreams. Making money is not a problem for them. Just wait for the promotion and salary increase. Well said, well said. Master Xie seemed to have fallen into a fantasy of reaching the peak of his life. He smiled so widely that the wrinkles on his face gathered. By the way, Roland looked at Qing and said, I have a new project to develop. Come to the office with me. Ah. Boss, Master Xie said as Roland turned to leave, do you have any other requirements for this tractor? For example, the shape, the color, and so on. Do you really think it's a prop in a movie? Roland shook his head and laughed. As long as it's reliable, everything else is not important. But please go ahead. If possible, I hope that the final product can have 5 pairs of wheels. That's not a problem at all, Master Xie said as he patted his chest. When I designed the chassis, I considered expandability. Leave it to me. Since the employees of the factory ran out to watch the test car, the factory was quite quiet. Roland noticed that Qing had increased the distance between them from 2 meters to 5 meters after they crossed the workshop gate. Roland could not help but feel amused. It seemed that Guard did not reveal her identity to Roland. Otherwise, she should have known that when a martialist wanted to do something bad, she could even run 50 meters first, let alone 5 meters. However, he was too lazy to improve his image in the eyes of his employees. As long as they worked hard for him, nothing else mattered. After walking into the messy office, Roland sat on the boss seat and went straight to the point. It's like this, I have a friend. There it was again. Qing could not help but curse in her heart. Every project started with a friend. The problem was that there were not many friends who were willing to spend hundreds of thousands of yuan on a pile of garbage. She admitted that rich people had all kinds of strange hobbies. However, judging from the boss's appearance, he did not look like a son of a rich family. She was confident in her judgment. After all, she had studied in a prestigious school and seen many rich second generations, but she had never seen a person as simple and unadorned as the boss. Even if the former kept a low profile, they would not treat themselves badly in terms of food and clothing. Although the things they used were niche, the quality and price were definitely not cheap. Moreover, there were fewer and fewer young people who were willing to lay low. But Mr. Roland, the clothes he wore were the most common street stalls, and he did not have a single ornament on him. Even the car he drove was a bumpy van. It was not enough to describe him as low-key. He exuded the aura of poverty from head to toe. How rich could the friend of such a person be? After graduation, she successfully applied for a job in the Clover Group, the largest enterprise in the city. She wanted to add a beautiful record to her resume, but she did not expect that the big boss would directly transfer her to this small factory, where she had to work on all kinds of strange projects. She began to wonder if Mr. Guard had been cheated, or if he was deliberately using this factory to cover up some shady business. For example, the new project proposed by the boss was wireless communication. Ching almost wanted to put her hand on her forehead and sigh. A walkie-talkie cost dozens of yuan on the internet, and an antique transmitter could also be bought, but he wanted to start with the most basic electronic tube. Just like the tractor project, it had to be handmade from scratch. Not a single ready-made part could be bought. That was a waste of money on purpose. I don't need to recruit people who are too professional. They can be graduates or radio amateurs. I can build a prefab house outside the factory as an office. It will save me the trouble of running back and forth. Roland explained his requirements in detail. I'll give them all the equipment they want, but remember, all the parts must be produced here. It doesn't matter if it's rough or crude. In other words, the lower the technology, the better. Doomsday Wasteland style, understand? That's my friend's style. This is different from a salary increase. I'm afraid I have to report it to Mr. Guard first. It's okay, Roland said generously. I think he'll agree. Just then his cell phone rang in his pocket. It was a call from the Martialist Association. Roland asked Ching to leave before picking up the phone. Hello, Mr. Roland. He heard a calm and familiar voice. It was Rock, the defender of the association. I have a new task for you. Do you have time to come to Green Leaf Sanatorium this afternoon? Now that Rock was the design bureau of Greycastle's biggest backer, Roland had no reason to refuse, so he agreed without hesitation. Since the destruction of the magic creature from the other side of the erosion, the whereabouts of the other fallen evils had suddenly become much more secretive, as if they had sensed danger and completely retreated from this city. As a result, the search results of the Tequila Witches were much lower than before. However, Roland had a feeling that it was not that simple. The goal of the fallen evils was to seize the Awaken's force of nature and weaken the power of the dream world. Now that the Prism City had been attacked and the martial arts contest had begun, a large number of martialists had gathered here. They should not give up so easily. Chapter 1290. How's your recovery? Fei Yuhan walked into Ward 402 with a stack of books and placed them on the bedside table. Thank you. Valkyries nodded gratefully. I can get out of bed and walk around. The doctor said that I'll be back to normal in about a week. That's good. Even among martialists, your self-healing ability is top-notch. Fei Yuhan smiled. Is that so? The force of nature has a different effect on the body. Not every awakened can be like you, who can fully recover in a month after the bones in your legs were crushed. However, you might not have seen a martialist suffer such a serious injury, so you don't know your own potential. Fei Yuhan paused. You should be one of the strongest in your world, right? Why do you think so? My master always said that the strong are usually strong in every aspect. Fast healing means that you have an excellent bone quality, and your body has a strong ability to resist attacks. These kinds of people are usually 1 in a million when it comes to martial arts, just like me. Fei Yuhan said calmly, when your injuries are fully healed, perhaps we can spar a few more times. Is that why you recruited me into your team? Valkyries said helplessly. You're a super genius of the association. I don't think I can help you with martial arts. It doesn't matter. Besides, you've been lying in bed for so long. You can only recover your strength quickly by sparring with powerful people. After all, the fallen evils won't care about your injuries. Valkyries nodded after a moment of silence. Then I'll be in your care. No problem. Fei Yuhan smiled. By the way, I went to the city center yesterday and bought some special pastries from the Kargard Peninsula. They're in the bag at the top of the book. You should be interested. After all, the 3 meals provided by the hospital are a little too monotonous. At this point, Fei Yuhan noticed a slight movement in Fei Yuhan's throat. It was an inconspicuous swallowing motion. Although the Kargard tribe could eat ordinary food, it was said that it was difficult to distinguish between good and bad. Only the unique ingredients produced in their land of origin could satisfy their taste buds. Fei Yuhan had tried this unique delicacy before, but she found it completely unacceptable. Of course, there was also a small group of people who claimed that as long as they carefully tasted it, they would be able to experience the rare deliciousness of this world. However, this view was not recognized by the public. Therefore, food from Kargard was only sold in some specialized stores. Compared to the majority of the residents in the city, the people from the peninsula were very few. Thank you. Valkyries hid her subconscious reaction well and thanked him again. It's nothing. I'm the captain after all. It's my duty to care for my teammates. Fei Yuhan waved her hand. But then again, you really like reading. Yeah, when I'm bored I just want to find some books to flip through. It's become a habit. It's a good habit. There isn't much entertainment in the sanatorium, but there are a lot of books. If there's anything else you want to read, just tell me. Thank you. At this point, the two did not continue the conversation. For a moment, only the rustling of pages could be heard in the room. Fei Yuhan stood by the window of the ward and looked at the scenery outside. The weather today was very good. It could be considered a refreshing autumn day. The willow branches beside the artificial lake drooped into the water, creating ripples in the gentle breeze. Further away, a flock of swans leisurely swam across the surface of the lake, leaving a string of white waves in the reflection of the blue sky. This was indeed a good place to rest and recuperate. However, the corner of her eyes never left Valkyrie's. Through the reflection of the glass window, Fei Yuhan had been observing her every move. She was not a warm-hearted person, and she had no interest in forcing others to compete with her. The reason why she pretended to be like this was because she had accidentally sensed during the visiting meeting a month ago that this person might know Roland. No, to be more accurate, she knew Roland, but Roland treated her as someone else. Those seemingly casual flirting were in fact to confirm her own judgment. Fei Yuhan believed that she was right. But what puzzled her was that Roland did not show any hostility when he asked. His tone was rather relaxed, which meant that regardless of whether Valkyries was the person he was familiar with or not, she did not pose a threat. But the latter showed strong hostility and nervousness. Even though it only happened the moment they entered the door, Fei Yuhan, who was walking in front, still caught it. What kind of relationship would produce such a difference in reaction? If it was a little more melodramatic, it would not be difficult to imagine a couple falling out because of love, and the former would go through 10 years of plastic surgery to take revenge, and the former would be filled with regret, but Fei Yuhan did not think in that direction. The reason was that Valkyries' subsequent control over her expression was too shocking. If not for the initial scene, even she would not have been able to discover any clues. If it was just a matter of love, it was really hard to believe that someone could do this. Fei Yuhan had been very observant since she was young, and after her force of nature awakened, it reached a whole new level. Because of this, those who were truly familiar with her distanced themselves from her, and were even afraid to interact with her. For a long time, she had gotten used to this feeling of alienation, and gradually distanced herself from everyone. After all, she only needed to look at them from afar to be able to guess their thoughts. But Roland was different. This newly promoted hunter from the association was one of the few people she could not see through. It was the same for Valkyries, who had a certain relationship with Roland. They were obviously hiding something, and the secret behind it was hard for her not to pay attention to it. After interacting with Valkyries for a while, Fei Yuhan was able to confirm her intuition. This martialist from the Kargard Peninsula behaved like an ordinary person, but there were still many details in his life that revealed abnormalities. If she had known him before Roland, she would not have suspected anything. But after thinking about it, these abnormalities could surprisingly be linked together. For example, she had previously brought a snack from her hometown to Valkyries. The latter did not show any joy at the beginning, but later discovered that Valkyries had eaten it cleanly. But this time, there was a clear change in Valkyries' reaction. At first glance, this did not seem to be a big problem, but upon careful thought, it meant that Valkyries did not eat to fill his stomach, but that he did not even know the taste of his hometown snacks. It did not make sense for a person from the Kargard Peninsula to not have tasted Kargard's specialty dishes. In addition, in the past month, Fei Yuhan had never seen Valkyries play with his mobile phone. Nowadays, young people could not leave their mobile phone for even a moment, but Valkyries seemed to be disconnected from it. It was really strange. And those books, according to Valkyries' request, Fei Yuhan had borrowed history books from the library. Although it was a good habit to love reading, Fei Yuhan had to admit that she did not have the patience and willpower to read a boring and tasteless history book for an entire day. If the change in his attitude towards food was due to his initial lack of appetite, the fact that he did not play with his mobile phone due to his gentle nature, and the fact that he only read history because of his special hobby, it seemed to make sense. But for all these abnormalities to appear at the same time was too much of a coincidence. Compared to the above reasons, Fei Yuhan had a feeling that Valkyries was quickly familiarizing himself with the world. If it were any other time, she would probably just laugh it off, but after thinking of the words, "Your Majesty," an unbelievable guess suddenly emerged in her mind. She did not want to continue thinking about it because it was too horrifying and even made her shudder. But once the thought emerged, she could no longer ignore it. With it, all the abnormalities had a reasonable explanation. In this city, some unusual people had snuck into it. Chapter 1291. How many of them were there? What was their purpose? Were they all awakened with the force of nature? What would the other world be like? Fei Yuhan had no idea. But for now, they were not enemies. Roland's battle against the fallen evils was real. He was indeed fighting against the erosion. The previous joint operation was proof. Fei Yuhan would never forget what she heard before she fainted. What did he mean by, "Your Majesty, I knocked everyone unconscious"? Furthermore, Roland had deliberately avoided her gaze many times. What was the difference between this and the fact that there was nothing to hide? In other words, if the hunter really harbored some unspeakable evil intentions, she would not have been able to survive until now. After destroying the corrupted magic creature, the hunter would have the opportunity to kill her as well. As long as she pushed the blame to the enemy, no one would suspect anything. Therefore, Fei Yuhan felt that this was a gesture of goodwill. Apart from the lack of concrete evidence, the other party's goodwill was also the reason why she did not immediately report this to the higher-ups of the association. Be it Roland or Valkyries, they had both chosen to hide their true origins. Although she did not know the reason, since they hoped so, there was no harm in maintaining this tacit understanding for a while longer and allowing her to observe for a while longer. Her phone rang. "Yes, I understand." Fei Yuhan hung up the phone and nodded at Valkyries. "Mr. Rock is looking for me. I won't be able to accompany you today." "It's okay, business is more important. See you tomorrow." By the way, just as she reached the door, Valkyries called out to her. "Captain, can you bring me some books related to technological development tomorrow?" "You mean something like an encyclopedia?" Fei Yuhan thought for a while. "It should be fine. But there are many types of such books. I'm not sure if I can find the one you want." "It's okay, any type is fine," the other party said happily. "Thank you." "It's nothing." After the door closed, Fei Yuhan's expression returned to normal. As expected, she was not a simple history buff. She was trying her best to understand this new world. Valkyries looked at the closed door and sighed. It knew that it was being too impatient, but it had no better choice. This human named Fei Yuhan was its only source of information about the outside world. If it were to take things slowly, this month would be wasted on the sickbed. If Haxord's plan went smoothly, the Western Front Army would have already expanded their front line into human territory. This was the time when he needed manpower. His disappearance would definitely infuriate the Sky Lord. To be honest, Valkyries was feeling rather conflicted. On one hand, it hoped that Haxord would wake it up from the red mist pond at all costs, even if it would lose most of its memories in the realm of mind and might even cause irreversible damage to its brain. On the other hand, it was unwilling to give up on the clues it had obtained so far. The reason for the former was simple. The more it probed, the more uneasy it felt. It would be easier to forget about it. Regardless of what secrets Roland was harboring, as long as it obtained the legacy shard in the real world, the humans would not be able to cause any more trouble. Everything they possessed would be passed down to the race in the form of inheritance. This secret was no exception. The latter was due to Transformer Heftali's warning. Even if they won the battle of divine will, they would not be able to bring the race to the divine domain. As a teacher's last words, it was like a seed that was deeply rooted in the Nightmare Lord's heart. If victory could not allow the race to continue, then what was the right way to do it? Would the answer lie in this strange and inconceivable realm of mind? Of course, these were all reasons on the surface. It also had a thought that it could not say or was even willing to admit. During this period of time, it felt as though it had returned to the days when it was studying in the Cloud School. Not only was it able to come into contact with new knowledge every day, it also allowed it to see a future that was completely different from reality. Vaucres took out a sealed box of pastries from the bag at the top of the book. It had an exquisite, flower-printed packaging and looked exactly the same as human food. The different colors represented different flavors, and when it was opened, it could smell an alluring aroma. It was a delicacy that it had never imagined. Eating was an act of the lower class in the race. Only hybrid demons and primal demons needed to eat with their mouths. Ordinary blood food could only provide very little energy and was very difficult to digest. Therefore, the most common method was to put the food in a place where there were a lot of red mayflies to dry and soften it before eating. This process was very similar to how humans baked, except that they used fire. Of course, the processed food could only fill one's stomach at most. Ever since it became a promoted person and could directly absorb nutrients from the red mayflies, Vaucres had never eaten food again. Some of its people had even extended the concept of eating to other races, such as humans. After all, even witches could not live without 3 meals a day. It used to think so, but it was only now that it realized that the food produced in the Kargard Peninsula could be so delicious. Vaucres put a piece of pastry into its mouth and felt its heart-piercing sweetness. Without a doubt, this food still retained the simple flavor of the dried red mayflies. It was an innovation based on the characteristics of the race and human technology. Vaucres quickly finished the pastry. If the Cloud School was still around, if the Transformer was still around, would they also be able to create such excellent food? The Nightmare Lord shook its head and threw this thought to the back of its mind. In any case, the Battle of Divine Will had been brewing for hundreds of years and was already as unstoppable as a flood. The current situation was not something that it could control alone. Its most important goal was to ensure the continuation of the race. However, the problem returned to the first point. It knew very well where its uneasiness came from. After a month of exploration, Vaucres could basically confirm that the shocking changes in the real world were inseparable from this place, and that Roland was the culprit behind all the changes. The firearms mentioned in the history books were almost identical to the description in Osrook's report. The last piece of the puzzle had appeared in its mind. It had indeed found the source of the human's promotion. Although it did not know how the human male had obtained the permission to enter the realm of mind, it was the current situation. From this vast realm of mind, he had learned knowledge far beyond the times and then applied it to the race. The witches had become the bridge to transform the knowledge, instead of wasting it on the battlefield like in the past. They were not facing the Union of 400 years ago, but a new human community. It would not have been so bad if that was all. After flipping through the history books, it also noticed a shocking fact. That was, when the human civilization improved to a certain level, the speed of development would suddenly increase by several times. For example, 1,000 years ago, they were still using guns to kill each other, but now their footprints were all over the sky and the sea, and their weapons had evolved to the extent of destroying the world. This was also the biggest source of uneasiness for Vaucres. How far had Roland gone? Chapter 1292. Mr. Roland, I'll leave the association's third line of defense to you. Don't worry, I will do my best. After bidding farewell to Rock, Roland walked out of the Guardian's office and exhaled softly. Things did not go as smoothly as he had expected. The Prism City's tracking of the fallen evils had also come to a standstill, and he had not been able to obtain more information about their whereabouts. The guard had informed him to come here mainly to arrange the garrison duty for the martial arts tournament. Roland had mentioned this plan before. After the failure of the tracking operation, it became one of the main plans to counterattack the enemy. Since the fallen evils were hiding so well, it was better to wait for them at the conference. In order to prevent internal conflicts, the higher-ups of the association simply set up a schedule of the competition and requested the star martial artists to execute according to the schedule. In other words, this year's martial arts competition would completely become a meticulously arranged trap. Although there were suspicions that the competition was rigged, everyone knew what was more important in the face of an existential crisis. In addition, the higher-ups attached great importance to this matter. They pulled everyone into the office alone for a private discussion, which could be considered as saving everyone's face. When Roland arrived, he saw many celebrities in the hall, but no one showed any dissatisfaction. According to the plan, the defense circle was divided into 4 layers. The first layer consisted of the government guards and the members of the association disguised as spectators. Their main task was to identify the enemies and kill the lone fallen evils. The second layer consisted of the star martialists on and off the stage. The third layer consisted of the old-school martialists who hid their identities. The last layer consisted of the defenders themselves. Such a complicated arrangement was to ensure that the martial arts contest would go on smoothly before the fallen evils appeared on a large scale. Secondly, considering that the opponent had someone who could instantly control the martialists, it would be difficult to screen the entrances and exits. As the holder of the hunting license, he was naturally assigned to the third line of defense. In fact, he was not only responsible for monitoring the suspicious characters in the field, but also the participating martialists. Although Roland was a little disappointed that he could not find any new clues about the hiding place of the fallen evils, he did not have any better ideas at the moment. Setting up a trap and waiting for the enemy to crash into it was the most feasible method at the moment. After all, he knew more than the association. The fallen evils were not simply attracted by the force of nature. What drove them was the will of the gods. Their ultimate goal was to destroy the dream world and return all magic power to the realm of mind. Therefore, the enemy would not easily let go of the opportunity to obtain so many cores at once. When he reached the corner of the corridor, the figure of a woman suddenly appeared in front of Roland. He immediately felt his scalp tighten. It didn't matter who the other party was, it just had to be the person he didn't want to see the most at the moment. The genius martial artist of the association, Fei Yuhan. Ah, it's you. She seemed to have noticed Roland and raised her head. There were only the two of them in the empty corridor. It would be too awkward for him to pretend that he didn't see her, so he cleared his throat and squeezed out a smile. Ahem, hello. However, the other party's next words caused his smile to freeze on his face. By the way, I haven't properly thanked you for what happened last time. She took the initiative to extend her hand and said nonchalantly, "Thank you for killing that strange monster and saving everyone from danger." Roland was momentarily at a loss for words. After a moment, he reluctantly said, You're welcome. It's a pity that the association pushed all the credit to me." Fei Yuhan sighed softly. No, that's good. He hurriedly waved his hands. Actually, due to some special reasons, I had to hide my identity. The fewer people that notice me, the better. All right then. Unexpectedly, the other party did not pursue the matter further and readily agreed. Since you said so, I'll accept it as a gift. Roland was surprised. Why would Fei Yuhan accept this explanation so calmly? If she still remembered everything that happened before she fainted, then she definitely wouldn't forget Spirit's voice. But from her attitude, it was clear that she wanted to ignore this matter. Based on his previous interactions with Fei Yuhan and the comments he had heard, Fei Yuhan was not a carefree person. It could even be said that she was the complete opposite. Like all young geniuses, Fei Yuhan was arrogant and picky. She had high expectations for herself and others. Her words were filled with a coldness that kept people at a distance. She was definitely not an easy martialist to get along with. But now, Fei Yuhan's behavior was completely different from the image he had in mind. Oh, Fei Yuhan seemed to have suddenly thought of something and casually asked, "What kind of encyclopedia do you think a history enthusiast would like?" Roland was stunned. "Why are you asking this? Do you still remember the survivor from the Kargard Peninsula that we visited?" Fei Yuhan explained. "Miss Vaucries, she is now a member of my team. I was originally worried that she would be too bored while recuperating, but I didn't expect her to be interested in reading. In this 1 month, she practically flipped through all the history books in the library. So you're actually worried about others?" The corner of Roland's mouth twitched. Just as he was about to speak, a thought suddenly flashed across his mind, causing the hairs on his back to stand up. Wait, isn't the Vaucries she mentioned the familiar demon in the memory fragments? In this 1 month she has been reading non-stop, and all of them are history books? From the beginning to the end? You can say that, especially war history. An interesting hobby, isn't it? Could it be just a coincidence? Roland's thoughts turned rapidly, and he changed his words at the last moment. Indeed, I think it should be an encyclopedia related to the humanities and society. I'm sorry, I still have a mission from the Guardian, so I have to go now. Even though the topic was abruptly cut short, Fei Yuhan did not show any dissatisfaction. Me too. She nodded. Goodbye, Mr. Roland. Goodbye. After she turned around and left, Roland walked downstairs with a solemn expression. His pace became faster. Fei Yuhan stopped and quietly listened to the gradually fading footsteps. This one-on-one encounter was not a coincidence, but the result of her deliberate choice of timing. Honestly speaking, Roland had always been the most difficult point for her to confirm. He was different from Vaucries. If not for him calling her Your Majesty, she would not have found any flaws in him. For example, during the previous visit, he took out his cell phone 3 times a minute, his gaze lingered on beautiful women for an extra 2 seconds, and his first choice of beverage was cola. Everything was no different from the average person in this era. This also caused an inexplicable contradiction in the idea of another world. Since Vaucries knew Roland, it meant that they came from the same world, but why was there such a huge difference between the two? Therefore, this encounter was not only to repay the other party's kindness, but also an attempt by Fei Yuhan. And the result was surprising. Roland seemed to have realized the uniqueness of Vaucries through her reminder, but his reaction was very different from what she had expected. As a partner from another world, if he wanted to continue hiding this matter, he should have covered for Vaucries without batting an eyelid. But the first emotion that he showed was a strong vigilance, even more so than when she mentioned the joint annihilation operation. Although Roland tried his best to conceal it, she could still clearly see the twitching of the muscles in the corner of his eyes. In terms of controlling his expression, he was obviously much worse than Vaucries. It seemed that this attempt had benefited her greatly. Since she had decided to maintain this tacit understanding and continue observing, the interaction between the two would undoubtedly give her more clues. Fei Yuhan curled her lips and knocked on the door of the defender's office. When Roland returned to the apartment, the first thing he did was to find Phyllis and Donnan. Chapter 1293. Demons? The two were startled. Are you talking about the mutated people in this world? For the ancient witches, it was more difficult for them to adapt to the dream world than to live in the modern world. The Kargardians, a minority race that looked like demons, had been regarded as part of the human race. Not only did they behave like humans, but they could also reproduce with each other. They were completely different from their enemies in the outside world. It had become an instinct of the ancient witches to attack the demons. Under Roland's repeated instructions, they managed to restrain their impulse, but now they had to be vigilant again. Roland had to admit that it was difficult for ordinary people to change their minds. Therefore, the first people he thought of were Phyllis and Donnan, who had followed him into the dream world and were good at hiding. You can think of it that way. Roland described Valkyrie's characteristics and suspicious points. I didn't see any magic stones on her, which is the biggest difference between her and a real demon. But you still have to be cautious and monitor her under the assumption that she has the ability of a magic stone. Reading through history was the most effective way to understand a world. Who would be so eager to know the history of the dream world? If the demon, named Valkyries, really came from the Kargard Peninsula, she should have received compulsory education. However, from Fei Yuhan's words, Roland knew that she had read through the history books in chronological order. She was at the point where two worlds were eroded at the same time, which was suspicious enough. Yes, Your Majesty. The two nodded. Even if you confirm that she's a demon, don't attack her in the sanatorium. Roland thought for a moment and added, first, there are many awakened ones there, so it's easy for accidents to happen. Second, I want to find out how she passed through the memory fragments to come here. After all, the end of room 0510 was not connected to the nest of one or two senior demons, but a very large city of the mutated people. If other demons could also pass through the door, it would be a real headache. I understand, but... Phyllis said hesitantly, if we're not by your side, what if we encounter danger? Don't worry, this isn't the real world. Roland smiled. You've seen that those fallen evils can't hurt me at all. As long as I don't take the initiative to take risks, they can't do anything to me. On the other hand, remember to prioritize your own safety and give me a call every few hours. Yes, Your Majesty. The two looked at each other, put their hands on their chests and said, then let's go. When Epsilon walked into the underground assembly point, the entire room was in a special phase where the two worlds overlapped. The floor and walls were covered in scarlet magical light, as though they were flickering like embers. In this state, the movie was equivalent to a fictional space that was isolated from the rest of the world. Nothing in the real world could affect it. This naturally included tracking and exploration. She saw that Beta was still half-squatting with his hands on the ground. His body was almost transparent, like an illusory shadow. According to the flow of time here, he had been in this position for almost half a month. You're not done. Epsilon looked at the motionless Delta. The latter's mask flickered before he seemed to recall that his consciousness could no longer be used for direct communication. He replied in a hoarse voice, this world is already very bloated. It's not easy to fully analyze it. But Beta's work is almost done. I believe there will be results soon. What about your side? Did you get any news? The magic stealer has set a trap and is waiting for us to walk into it. The rules of the world limited the power of the oracles. Even if they represented the will of God, they had to follow the rules. As expected, Delta's tone was flat. This does seem to be a way to save time and effort. Unfortunately, we no longer need those scattered magic powers. Epsilon nodded and did not continue. There was a simpler way to destroy the realm of mind that was not controlled by God. That was to directly destroy the creator of the realm of mind. Most of the realm of mind used the creator's consciousness as its source. Just like the relationship between a house and a pillar, once the pillar was removed, the world would collapse and the distributed magic powers would be returned to the divine domain. But this world was already large enough. It was not easy to find the creator among the countless targets. Therefore, they had to first mobilize a large amount of magic power to analyze the world to accurately pinpoint the source. The invasion of the Prism City was to solve the magic power requirement. With the support of a large number of cores, completing the analysis was only a matter of time. Of course, finding the creator did not mean that they could successfully eliminate it. The creator would often be protected by the world. That was also the reason why they had failed previously. To resist the protection, they had to pull the creator into the gap between the two worlds. Only there could God interfere with the rules of the world and defeat the enemy. Therefore, even the oracles had the possibility of failure. But there was not much time left. They were the last hope of God. If even they failed, God would directly destroy the entire realm of mind. When that happened, thousands of years of hard work would be for naught. All the accumulated results would also be reduced to nothingness. Unless it was absolutely necessary, God would not be willing to take this step. Without a doubt, everything was the fault of the owner of this world. Epsilon involuntarily clenched her fists, but she quickly relaxed them. What's going on? Why was she angry? As an oracle, she should not have any emotions. She should not have any emotions, nor should she worry about victory or defeat. Other than the mission, she should not care about anything else. Wait, come to think of it, I have never considered such a problem before. What's wrong? Delta noticed her actions. No, nothing. She turned around and walked to a corner and sat down slowly. When did this change begin? Epsilon thought for a long time before she vaguely realized that it began from the moment she killed the traitor's oracle. Back then, she had disguised herself and blended in with the apostles, silently approaching the traitor who shared the same origin as her. It was only at the moment she attacked that the traitor reacted. Strangely, the traitor did not put up much resistance. When her arm pierced through the traitor's chest, she only gently held onto her bloody arm and leaned over to say something. She could not remember the content clearly, but the voice was surprisingly familiar. There was even a sense of warmth, as though it was an embrace that she had not seen for a long time. And in the end, the frozen expression on the traitor's face was a calm smile. Damn it, why am I thinking about this now? That's not right, why am I angry over this? Epsilon suddenly felt her mind in chaos. What do you want to say? Delta spoke again. There's no way to communicate telepathically here. If you have something to say, say it. At this moment, a ripple suddenly spread out from the middle of the room. Beta, who had been half squatting, opened his eyes. Search complete. It's finally done. Delta immediately shifted his gaze. What's the result? Beta raised his hands, and 3 blurry heads appeared in his palms. As the lines recombined and combined, they gradually became clear and complete. There are actually 3 of them? That's right, but we only need to deal with the remaining 2 because the first one no longer exists. Epsilon quickly read out all the information in the image. The 3 creators were Traitor Oracle Consciousness, Correlation 1%, Codename Lon. Self-Logical Consciousness, Correlation 42%, Codename 0. Chapter 1294. In order to speed up the progress of the research project, Roland adjusted his work and rest schedule. Every day after lunch, he would sleep for 2 to 3 hours in the office, which indirectly increased the number of times he entered the dream world. Because of this, groups of Scourge would appear in the Castle District after noon, which became a spectacle in the Castle District. With the help of the Grey Castle Design Bureau, the new batch of industrial projects progressed smoothly. By the last week of autumn, the design of the tractor was basically finalized. Prior to this, all the projects in Neverwinter were handmade by Anna, who would verify the feasibility and finalize the design. Then, they would divide the production parts and deliver them to the factory for trial production. Finally, they would determine the flow plan and assemble the tractor. Not only was it time-consuming, but it was also easy to make mistakes, especially when it came to dividing the production parts. As the processing ability of Blackfire was far superior to any machine tool, the factory might not be able to produce the parts that Anna could produce. A machine had hundreds of thousands of parts. It was undoubtedly a huge amount of work to determine which parts could be completed by the factory itself and which had to be handed over to Anna for post-processing. Only after the complete assembly of the tractor could the project enter the phase of mass production. In fact, during the production of the second-generation steam engine, Roland had suffered at this stage. Although the pressure valve part seemed simple, it was surprisingly low when it was officially mass-produced. As a result, the relevant production line had to be restarted, and the final product was also delayed by more than half a month. The Grey Castle Design Bureau had basically completed all the preliminary work for Anna, from testing and finalization to the flow design, as well as to whether ordinary machine tools could meet the requirements. All these processes could be completed directly in the dream world. Therefore, once the plan was finalized, the Ministry of Industry could immediately organize the production, which greatly reduced the development cycle and cost of the new project. Roland named this agricultural machine, which he had high hopes for, Harvest. It would inherit the name of the 5 pairs of wheels and plow the land of Greycastle. Of course, Roland did not let Master Xie rest. The current Harvest was just a simple chassis. It would not be a problem to attach a plow to it as a tractor, but it was still a long way from the final form of the 5 pairs of wheels. He hoped to be able to achieve everything the army needed on this platform. As for the transmitter, Ching quickly recruited a few applicants. Some of them were fresh graduates, and some were amateur radio enthusiasts. However, when Roland saw the circuit diagrams, he felt dizzy. In the end, he ordered all of them to change the circuit diagrams to physical ones. Only then could he barely distinguish what was what. Even so, his learning in this area was abnormally slow. He could only forcibly memorize the sample and slowly ponder it with Anna. In addition to these 2 major projects, Neverwinter's other major preparedness projects had achieved results one after another. The first was the North-South Artery Plan. Horford Quinn had sent him a letter, saying that the Kingdom of Dawn had invested nearly 1,000 people to set up cement calcining plants in the 2 border cities. These factories can produce hundreds of tons of cement every day to meet the needs of hardening the road surface. Now, the road from the Windward Ridge to the Sparkling River had basically been paved, and the second half of the road on the Cage Mountain had also been started. It was estimated that it would be completed in about half a month. Even with the help of Lotus and Molly, this speed of construction was enough to be regarded as excellent. Obviously, the Quinn family had put a lot of effort into this project. Moreover, the road from the turning point of the eastern region of the Redwater River to the city of Evernight had been completed, which meant that Neverwinter was only one step away from being able to project power from the land to the battlefield thousands of kilometers away. The second project was the supporting project of the North-South Artery Plan, the Hump steam truck. The first one had also been rolled off the assembly line and put into service. It had a classic flat-nosed cab, a front-mounted engine, a single front wheel and 2 rear wheels. Except for the slightly longer head, its appearance was almost similar to that of the modern trucks. It weighed about 10 tons and was designed to carry 6 tons. It could maintain a stable speed of 40 kilometers per hour on a flat concrete road and continuously drive for 300 kilometers. When necessary, the driver could also fill it with rainwater, well water, or even urine to increase its mileage. Of course, even without any replenishment, it was enough to travel between the city and the river. Unlike the armored train, each truck needed at least 2 drivers. In other words, even if Neverwinter could immediately produce a large number of trucks, there was still a huge shortage of drivers. Fortunately, they already had a prototype truck. Next, they just needed to set up a driving school and quickly train a group of qualified drivers. After all, there were no traffic laws in this era. As long as the truck could start, everything else was easy. The last project was the lead-acid battery. Although it was not eye-catching and the technical content was much lower than the previous projects, it was very useful. For example, the battery provided power for the headlights and tail lights of the truck, which was also the only electrical equipment on the hump. With the lights, the truck's driving time was instantly extended from day to night, which almost doubled the efficiency. It could also be used to start the biplane, which could save the ground crew a lot of effort. More importantly, if the engine stalled in the air, the pilot could directly try to start it again, which indirectly improved the safety. In short, with a large number of immigrants moving in, the industrial capacity of Neverwinter once again broke through the bottleneck and entered a period of rapid growth. However, Roland also knew that this increase was not entirely due to the increase in population. If it was still manual production, it would take several years to train a layman who knew nothing into a qualified worker, let alone a few months. But here, those experienced workers were only afraid that you wouldn't learn, but they were also not afraid that you wouldn't be able to learn, because promotions and salary increases were closely related to the apprentices under them. They would always look like they were hungry and thirsty, and they would teach everything they knew. Ordinary people only needed 1 or 2 weeks of hands-on instruction to understand the basic operation of a machine tool. Even if a newcomer did not know a word, he could imitate the steps and produce qualified parts. With the new productivity system, the promotion of universal education, and the emphasis on creation and research, the industrialization of the city would only get faster in the future. However, the news he received was not all good. According to Iron Axe's report, the First Army was under increasing pressure at the front line. With the spreading red mist, the demons could already reach the Cage Mountain area. Some people even said that they had seen devil beasts in the Kingdom of Dawn. When he was on the fertile plains, Roland already knew that the demons could attack from thousands of miles away. Although they could not mobilize many troops, even a small number of mad demons could cause considerable damage to the rear. And now, the scattered devil beasts were very likely to be sentinels who were scouting for routes for the surprise attack. If the First Army wanted to counteract this, they must have the same mobility. Chapter 1295. Roland met Vendy and Tilly in the parlor. That's the current situation. Roland briefly told them about the situation at the front. I'm afraid we can't delay it any longer. The First Army needs the help of witches, Vendy said seriously. I'm going to inform the witches. They should be ready after such a long rest. Finally, you say something. Tilly twitched her mouth. I haven't finished writing the flight manual yet. I've long wanted to go to the front to verify the ideas that I've been thinking about for a long time. Also, what about the special fighter planes? Don't forget what you promised me, brother. Roland did not reply perfunctorily as usual. It was not that he did not want to, but that his voice suddenly seemed to be stuck in his throat. Your Majesty? Vendy seemed to notice his abnormality. Are you all right? Roland tried to calm himself down and nodded slowly. As you all know, the bloody moon has appeared. This will be the last war that mankind will face. But no one knows how long it will last. Maybe it will be a year, or maybe it will be 10 years. This time, we may not come back until the end of the war. He found that he couldn't go on. No one could predict the final outcome of the Battle of Divine Will. Last time, Ashes was defeated on the fertile plains. This time, how many people could survive until the end of the war? Many of the witches in the Witch Union were in their early 20s. In another world, they should still be enjoying a carefree college life, but now they were an indispensable force in the Battle of Divine Will. This war concerned the future of mankind, so everyone must do their best. As a member of mankind, witches were essentially no different from ordinary people. It was not that Roland did not understand this, but after all, feelings were not the reason. Since the establishment of the Witch Union, he had been with them day and night for so many years. Now, when he thought that this might be the last time he would see them, he still found it difficult to give the order to go to war. If other people saw you like this, they would laugh out loud. Tilly grinned. It's been so many years. Haven't you gotten used to this position? Of course. I don't hate it. My apologies, Your Majesty, Vendy stood up and said. Before Roland could react, she had already walked behind him and hugged him. Will this make you worry less? Everyone knows what you've done. Even if you don't say a word, everyone will take the initiative to stand up for you. After all, you've taught us that if we don't fight, we won't get anything. Winning the Battle of Divine Will is essentially the same as protecting the sacred mountain. I believe the other sisters also think so. The warmth from his back calmed Roland down. That's right, he wasn't the only one who thought this way. Everyone knew that this day would come sooner or later. If they wanted to escape, there was no need to wait until now. Since all the witches were here, their intentions were self-evident. If he were to say things like, I don't want to force everyone to participate in the war, or, if anyone wants to stay, feel free to do so at any time, it would seem a little pretentious. The only thing left to do was to go all out. Thank you. Vendy smiled and returned to her seat. Then, Roland took a deep breath and gazed at the two of them. The Witch Union and the Air Knight Corps are ready to set off to support the front line. As you wish, Your Majesty. Leave it to me, brother. The news that the witches were about to set off for the kingdom of Wolfheart soon spread throughout the castle district. It only took Lightning half an hour to pack the necessary items: a backpack with ammunition and sigils, a waist pocket stuffed with seasonings and salt, and Maggie on top of her head. According to the usual practice, the two of them were always the first to set off, responsible for scouting and guiding the follow-up troops. But this time, when Lightning went to find Vendi, the latter asked her to stay. "Don't be in such a hurry." Vendi reached out and hugged Maggie. "In fact, someone asked me to see you before we set off." "See me?" Lightning was slightly surprised. "Is it Aunt Marjorie?" "Well..." Vendi covered her mouth and said, "You'll understand when you see her. By the way, she's waiting for you in the courtyard." "She's so well informed?" Lightning shrugged. "All right then." Cuckoo. Maggie wanted to follow her, but Vendi held her firmly in her arms. She could only watch Lightning disappear at the door. "Sorry, just stay here with me for a while." Vendi smiled and patted the pigeon's head. "At times like this, I think she wants to be alone with her." Lightning walked out of the castle and walked along the long corridor into the courtyard. She immediately saw a slightly fancy figure in the courtyard. "Well, it's Mr. Sandy Osaka," she muttered. "What can I do for you?" However, when he turned around, the little girl suddenly froze on the spot. Although he was wearing the same clothes, he was obviously not the same as when she first saw him. Although they hadn't seen each other for many years, his appearance still overlapped with the impression in her memory. "Father?" She couldn't believe what she had just heard. "I'm sorry, I've been hiding it from you." Thunder smiled bitterly. "I didn't want my daughter to follow in her mother's footsteps, so I decided to temporarily cut off contact with you. When did you know I was here?" Lightning interrupted in a low voice. "You haven't been in Border Town for long. Did Aunt Marjorie tell you?" Thunder nodded in agreement. "So you're all accomplices." "And His Majesty is also." "Don't blame them, I strongly asked them to do so." Before Thunder could finish his words, he saw his daughter quickly walking towards him, one of her fists already raised. He closed his eyes and quietly waited for Lightning's angry blow. However, the expected pain did not appear. After a long while, Thunder opened his eyes in surprise, only to see his daughter turn her fist into a palm and gently pat his forehead. At the same time, a smile appeared on the corner of her mouth. "That is to say, you know everything about my adventure in the western region of Grey Castle?" "Ah, discovering the holy city of Tequila, finding a living witch from 400 years ago, going deep into the ruins of the underground civilization, defeating the advance army of the demons." Lightning withdrew her hand and said, "How about it? It's comparable to your achievements, isn't it?" Thunder was stunned for a while, then he touched his head and laughed. "You're indeed my daughter, but this reunion is really gratifying and regrettable." "I understand gratifying, but what about regrettable?" "That's because you've grown up too fast." Thunder's tone was much more relaxed. "I thought you'd either hate me or throw yourself into my arms and cry bitterly, but it seems that I've worried too much. If I had not experienced the Battle of Tequila, I would probably have cried out loud," Lightning thought. But now she could not, because she had grown up. Before completing Ash's request and ending this war, she could not shed a single tear. "So you've been afraid of being hated by me, so you didn't dare to reveal your identity? Then why did you suddenly decide to reveal it now?" "Because I've decided to go north with you to fight against the battle of divine will." Thunder said word by word. "Anyway, my identity will be exposed by then, so I might as well reveal it first." "Really?" "Yes, I've already discussed this with His Majesty, mainly on the sea and at the port." "That's great." Lightning grabbed Thunder's hand. "Since there's still time, let me introduce you to my companions in the exploration group. You'll definitely have the opportunity to fight side by side. It seems that you've made some good friends, of course, but the strange thing is that they're all related to animals. Was I not very good at dealing with ordinary people when I was a child? For example, the pigeon named Maggie? No, it's the witch named Maggie." Anyway, as far as I know, the more popular animals are, the easier it is to get close to people. You don't have to worry about this. Well, then I'm much more relieved. Chapter 1296. Farina, breakfast is ready. Joe walked to the bedroom with a plate of bread and a small piece of cheese and knocked on the door. In the 2 months since the appearance of the bloody moon, their lives had been very simple. He would prepare 3 meals every day and then go to work in the administrative office. Farina, on the other hand, rarely came out. Most of the time, she stayed in the house motionlessly. Occasionally, she would ask him about the current situation in Hermes. It was only during these times that the two of them would chat. Joe did not know what Farina was thinking, but it was already a great fortune to be able to accompany her. He did not dare to ask for more. However, there was no movement behind the door today. Farina, are you up? Joe knocked a few more times doubtfully. Well, it's time for breakfast. Farina? There was still no response, as if there was no one in the room. Joe's face suddenly changed, and he suddenly thought of the worst possibility. Damn it, weren't things clearly changing for the better bit by bit? He put down the plate and slammed his shoulder against the door. With a bang, the door was opened. The most terrible scene did not appear. There was no rope hanging from the beam, and there was no blood dripping from the bed. Joe was a little relieved. As long as Hermes was still alive, things could still be salvaged. But this joy only lasted for less than a breath, and his heart suddenly sank to the bottom. The furnishings in the small bedroom were clear at a glance. There was no sign of Farina. The wooden bed, table, and window were carefully taken care of and looked very clean. It was as clean as the first day they moved in. Joe slowly walked to the table. The table was full of books about the church and Grey Castle Weekly a day ago, but now the table was empty. Gee, it was gone. When this thought came into his mind, Joe felt a great sadness. Obviously, this was not a sudden decision made by Farina. She even wiped the dust off the corner of the table, but she did not write a message. Was it because she did not want to bother him to clean up the mess? Joe sat down in front of the table numbly. Where would she go? Hermes? My former hometown? Or would he end his life in an uninhabited forest? Of course, he could look for her. But, in such a big world, what were the chances of him finding Farina? What's more, the other party didn't leave any message. It was obvious that they wanted to disappear. So what if he could find them? At the thought that he would never see that woman again in his life, Charles felt as if there was a hole in his heart. His thoughts also stopped, as if his brain refused to continue thinking. In the end, he couldn't change anything. Good morning, Joe. Why hadn't he noticed the signs earlier? Why had he become complacent about his peaceful life? Joe. In the end, all of this was just to satisfy his own needs. He had never thought about what the other party really needed. Joe. It wasn't until a hand turned Charles' face that he realized there was someone behind him. What are you mumbling to yourself? Joe blinked. It was Farina. She was frowning and looking him up and down with a scrutinizing look. Is there something wrong with your head? You didn't leave? Joe grabbed her arm in disbelief. Or, did you decide to stay? Huh. Farina's expression became even weirder, but she didn't shake off his hand. What do you mean? I just went to the administrative office. The two stared at each other for a while, and then Joe said awkwardly, Then, why did you go to the administrative office? To ask about the registration qualification. Farina's tone became serious. I saw a notice in the weekly newspaper that Neverwinter is recruiting truck drivers, so I wanted to have a try. What's a card? Joe was stunned. I don't know what it is, but based on the description, it should be similar to a carriage. I'm good at both riding and driving, so this may be an opportunity. Opportunity? The vague feeling came back to Joe's mind again. For the first time, he didn't let go of her hand. Why do you suddenly want to be a truck driver? Farina was silent for a while before she said, After thinking about it for a while, I figured it out. First of all, the original intention of the church was to save the world from danger and lead mankind out of the darkness. This is not only the church's one-sided propaganda, but also Roland Wimbledon admitted it was not a lie. However, the betrayal of the higher-ups made the church go on a wrong path. And then the next question is whether the king of Grey Castle is really fighting for mankind as he said. In Neverwinter, I've seen the bloody moon that symbolizes the divine will, prosperous subjects, and witches who are no different from ordinary people. These are basically the same as the propaganda. The only thing that can't be proven is the demons who are trying to destroy mankind. But Lord Tucker Thor did mention the existence of demons in his will, Joe murmured. Yes, but I haven't seen it with my own eyes. Roland's army is fighting with the demons from hell. Farina nodded. I don't want to make the same mistake again. I can only be sure if it's something I've seen with my own eyes. Do you want to go to the kingdom of Wolfheart? Joe's eyes widened. Farina said frankly, I'm from the church, so I can't pass the examination of the First Army. So I have to do something else. The truck driver needs to send supplies to the front of the battlefield, where everything will be confirmed. That was why she went to the administrative office to ask for the driver's identity. Joe asked cautiously, what if it's true? What if it's not? If it's true, I'll use the rest of my life to make up for all the sins I've committed, Farina answered without hesitation. Obviously, she had thought it over. Although I haven't arrested witches myself, it doesn't mean that what the church has done in the past has nothing to do with me. As a member of the Judgment Army, I'm also the traitor's lackey. She paused. If it's all a scam, then I'll go back to Hermes and see if I can help the new stream. This was the answer she had gotten so far. Joe gradually loosened his grip. He could not find any reason to stop her. She did not run away from her past mistakes, nor did she give up Tucker Thor's dying wish. She also built a solid foundation for her future. She was stronger than he had expected. At this time, apart from supporting her silently, any excuse or persuasion would destroy her. But the result was still the same. Once she became a driver and went to the kingdom of Wolfheart, she would not continue to live here. That was why she packed up everything in the room. Farina was going to leave him. Joe took a deep breath, fearing that the pain in his heart would suddenly overflow his throat. By the way, I have a presumptuous request, Farina said. A truck needs 2 drivers. I hope you can go with me. He couldn't help but be startled. To be honest, I've been away from the outside world for too long. I'm not confident that I can achieve this goal alone. She looked away, a little embarrassed. But you can refuse me. After all, you already have a stable job with good pay. I know I shouldn't mention this, but what? Joe asked subconsciously. Farina paused for a moment and then looked him in the eyes. But I need you. This was what Joe had blurted out before, and it was the first time he heard her say it. The one who was needed became the one who needed, and the one who needed was still the one who was needed? The blankness and emptiness disappeared, and the feeling of mutual enrichment instantly filled his chest. Let's eat breakfast first. It's getting cold. Joe let out a long sigh. Hey, in fact, there was no need to ask him this question. They had survived the exile in the kingdom of Wolfheart, let alone driving a truck to the kingdom of Wolfheart. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.